Damn it, what the hell was... Oh. I guess I'm dead, huh? Yep, can't feel my arm. Feels super cold.
Request confirmed. Acquisition of the skill heat resistance
That's
is
probably the
successful.
blood draining out of my torso. Oh, yeah, my arms are starting to go too now.
Request confirmed.
I did not know getting cut in half would hurt
Acquisition of
that
the
bad.
skill's stab resistance is successful. Continuing. Physical attack resistance. Acquisition
Guess I don't call him the
successful.
king of curses for nothing, huh? I couldn't even make him go all out against me.
Acquisition of unique skill.
Such a
Predator.
waste.
Successful.
He's gonna be pretty bored. Oh well, you genius have got this. If only there was someone better to guide them.
Extra skill acquired.
Someone better than me, at
Sage.
least.
Continuing.
Isn't that right?
Sage will transform
Suguru.
into the unique skill. Great Sage. Successful.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's me, T1Dubs, that one weeb, whatever the hell you want to call me, if you even remember my name. Because I've been gone for several months, so we're back with an absolute banger of an idea. That being, what if Satoru Gojo was reincarnated as a slime? For those of you who haven't seen Tensura, or That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, in the original story, a man whose name is known as Satoru Mikami from Japan would die in a stabbing incident and transfer to the other world, where his soul would reincarnate into the body of a slime. However, this time a different Satoru would have taken his place. Satoru Gojo. We're going to be getting into some spoilers from the Jujutsu Kaisen manga, so if you're an anime-only fan, I recommend you don't watch this video, but I figure if you're on the internet, you've probably seen it, so be warned. Anyway, after Gojo the Honored One took on the fraud Sukuna, using the Ten Shadows technique, used Maharaga to create a world-cutting slash that ended up ending Gojo's life. And this is where our story takes place today, beginning with Satoru Gojo as his mind transfers out of the world of Jujutsu Kaisen and into that of the world of Tensura. When Gojo opened his eyes, or what he felt were his eyes, he would see a world of nothingness. It would be as if though his entire perception had changed. He thought, am I dead? Is this the end? But nothing would come. Just a soft, bubbling silence with the occasional drip of water. Something he felt was water on his head. Gojo would try and move his fingers, his hands, his arms, his legs, anything, but nothing worked. He couldn't feel, he couldn't speak, his voice was silent. However, he still felt the pull of cursed energy, the pool that he had held within his lifetime and grown over his years as a student, facing off against the likes of Toji Fushiguro and Ryumen Sukuna, into his life now, where Gojo would begin to realize he could in fact move. As he moves, he would bump into something, slowly sitting on top of it as he feels information flood into his brain, wondering, what is this? What is this feeling? That is of Gojo absorbing a plant and realizing that he could never absorb plants. This creating the start of his journey, where he realizes that his form has changed from that of his smexy human form into that of a gelatinous figure, being a blue slime. So how would Gojo adapt to this new life? I think first off, he'd be pretty disappointed not to have gone to the promised place to meet Suguru, but honestly, I don't think he would do anything rash like try to end his slimy existence, especially when he figures out that he can continue to use cursed energy while in this form. Something talked about in Jujutsu Kaisen is the difference between the body and the soul, in that the soul and the body are one. This is interpreted differently based on techniques, such as with Mahito and Kanjaku. In Mahito's case, when he affects the soul, the body changes to match it, implying that the soul comes first and it alters the body. While with Kanjaku, who takes over bodies, he's able to absorb their techniques and their memories while just shoving his brain in them using his own cursed technique, which implies that the body contains everything regardless of having a soul. So, this is kind of a contradictory point in the series. But for the sake of this video, we're going to argue that Mahito is correct and that the soul comes before the body, which means that Gojo should still have access to his techniques and his abilities from when he was alive as a human, now carried over into this slimy form. Gojo would continue wandering around the cave, wandering and eating certain things before he eventually discovers his new skills, those that he had been blessed by the system when he had switched over to this new world. The, of course, skill that I'm mentioning being that of Sage, or Great Sage. The skill would tell Gojo about the things he's eating, saying whenever he's eaten magisteel, or any type of ore, which would apply to all of the items within the cave until he eventually runs into his first monster. Interestingly, I don't think Gojo would have to use the water blade or create the water blade technique here when Rimuru had to eat the water, because Gojo should be able to propel himself through the air using infinity, even if he is in this form. So he should be able to float or fly using infinity, just like he did when he was a human. So Gojo would be using blue and red to kill monsters, with him absorbing them using the same skill. This is when he discovers the ability to absorb and gain new skills, like the Thread Feathers and Poison Fang from the spider and the black snake within the cave, eventually discovering the ability to sense heat, magic, and other abilities from all of the monsters that Rimuru would have encountered in the original timeline. Since he's still technically blind, he's basically moving off of instinct and feeling at this point. Since Gojo Satoru is actually an experienced combatant, he would be able to sense some of the disdain and bloodlust from these monsters, which is how he's been able to fight and move around pretty well, but it's not going to carry him enough to escape the cave. This would be which is what pushes him towards meeting Veldora, with the magicules in the air getting so much thicker, which would actually disrupt his sense of cursed energy. When Gojo meets Veldora, they'd have a similar conversation to the original slime, with Gojo instead having a few more pop culture references, just because of Gojo being Gojo, and also promising not to be terrified of Veldora, saying there's no way he could be scarier than anything he's seen before, thinking of the disgusting curses he's fought in his life. Anyway, Veldora would bless him with the ability teaching him to use magicule sensing, which lets him see using magicules. This is when Gojo would discover how magicules and cursed energy actually work, with magicules being the raw molecules of energy in this world. So cursed energy, for example, would be as if though filtering magicules. Think of it like taking the power of a lightning bolt through a lightning rod and transferring it into electricity. In this much of the same way, cursed energy is a filter, of which basically he can use magicules and convert it into cursed energy. So if we're using math here, one magicule would equal about 2 cursed energy. So all of his magicules and magic power can be converted to double the amount of cursed energy. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, after he can see, he would in fact freak out a little, saying, "Holy crap, this guy's a dragon." His next question would be wondering how strong he is. But considering the promise he made with Veldora to be his friend, this seemed a little unfair. The two of them would talk for a while, with Gojo hurriedly trying to get out of there, getting bored with the conversation, before Veldora would offer him another deal, saying that in honor of their friendship he would give him a name, with him supposedly giving him the same. Essentially trading names in honor of their friendship. This is when Satoru would have the wonderful idea of bringing Veldora under his clan, turning Veldora into Veldora Gojo, officially making the Storm Dragon a part of the Gojo clan, with him being given the name of Rimuru, his new name being Rimuru Gojo. After this, Gojo would then devour Veldora, absorbing him entirely into his stomach and promising to help him break it, with him using the analysis skills of his currently unformed Six Eyes, which Great Sage would be able to make use of when analyzing unlimited imprisonment, the ultimate skill that had been used to imprison the Storm Dragon many years ago. With Great Sage using Six Eyes, the speed of which this barrier is going to be broken down will be broken much faster. So Great Sage would already be running with higher speed and processing just because of Gojo having the Six Eyes. Anyway, Gojo would leave the cave with him now being able to see, taking full advantage of the adventurer's thumbs to open the door to the dungeon, allowing Gojo to escape into the world as a free slime. Gojo, upon leaving the dungeon where Veldora had been kept, and now entering into the Great Forest of Jura, would eventually come across the same group of goblins that Rimuru had in the original. This time, Rimuru Gojo would be a little bit less naive in wondering how the goblins had sensed him, since he has some knowledge on cursed energy and sensory types, wondering if there's, similar to his magicule sense he learned from Veldora, another way to sense him. This would be the magicules coming off of his body which he has not learned to control yet. He would talk to Great Sage, asking if there's any way to limit the amount of magicules he's spilling out, which would eventually mean he can consume the excess magicule count from Veldora and consume it into his stomach, hiding it and subsequently not terrifying the goblins who had approached him for assistance. I think Gojo probably would have helped in the Direwolf case, with him helping the goblins take down their leader, if nothing else just to test his abilities, and since he has no home base or connections in this world, to give him somewhere to at least start with wondering what he's going to do with his new life. I think this Gojo would really embrace the second chance ideology of isekai, especially when considering that his entire life he had been used as a human weapon by the Jujutsu Society. So when he versus the direwolf chieftain and takes him out using a aka, just holding up his slime hand and blasting the head off his shoulders, the rest of the direwolves then bowing to him after he had defeated their leader, Gojo would definitely try to improve the living conditions, with him being a fan of Japanese cuisine, specifically sweets. So I could see him wanting to further enhance the society he's living in so he can continue to enjoy the luxuries from his past life. While the adventuring team sent from the Kingdom of Blumen would continue to investigate the dungeon, discovering that the Storm Dragon was indeed missing, this information would make it back to the Kingdom of Blumen and Fuse, the Adventurer Guild head. It's around this same point that Gojo would discover that he could name monsters when he was trying to talk to them, and realize that they didn't have names of their own. Gojo would similarly discover the ability to name them, thus granting them power, similar to the energy he had felt enter him when Veldora had named him with the name Rimuru. Anyway, I'm not quite sure what names that Gojo would come up with for the new goblins and the direwolves in this timeline, but for the sake of things, let's just say they stay the same for the characters. But I do imagine he would name some of them after his old comrades, so I'm sure there's a Gobyuji or something out there. Who knows? Anyway, he would take Gobta and the others to Dwargon, the city that was known by the Chief Rigurd, named after his son who had passed and his younger brother who had survived. Anyway, regardless, Gojo makes it to the city of Dwargon, the Dwarvish city, where he would get to similar shenanigans. At one point, when one of the goblins had been injured on the road, Gojo would wonder if there was any way he could apply his reverse curse technique to him to save him, when Great Sage would offer a suggestion, that of turning the absorbed plants from the cave where Veldora's magic heals had been soaking into everything, into a high potion. A potion made with the same cells to fully regenerate the goblin. Gojo would be impressed by this, wondering if it's even more effective because of the higher energy rate of magicules, discovering the high potion and also revealing that it's stronger than his reverse curse technique would be. Although, while Gojo can passively use his RCT, not everyone can, so this is actually a more efficient way, and it's way better at healing others than RCT was in his original world, so this is something he would keep in mind. In his head though, Gojo would think about how if he used a high potion combined with his RCT, he could probably even heal his brain faster than he had originally when he was going domain to domain with Sukuna, thinking of using the potion and RCT at the same time to recover the cells in his brain that were burning up from his combined use of RCT and his domain expansion of Limitless. One major difference here is that when Gojo becomes friends with the dwarf Kaiji and his other brothers from the shop, who were making the swords for the army, and he figures out he can replicate them as well, when they go out to the Elvish bar drinking and Vesta comes in trying to spoil the parade, Gojo would not be as flustered by the girls using him as a headrest. Just considering the amount of riz he had in his original life, he's pretty used to the attention. So honestly, it would be expected for him. Hell, even being called a monster he was pretty used to, even from his comrades, due to how powerful he was compared to everyone else. So if anything, it's more like the form matched the man now. I definitely believe that after seeing Dwargon, Gojo would be more motivated to create his own society, similar to his desire from his original life as Satoru Gojo, where he wanted to turn Jujutsu Society into a place for sorcerers to bloom. I feel like it makes sense that he would want to pass on his Jujutsu, and so during the small gap of time after his return from Dwargon, once he had attained Kaiji and the others to help with construction and beginning construction in the village, I do believe he began teaching those in the village, the goblins and the wolves, how to use cursed energy, explaining the use of negative emotions and the conversion of magicules into cursed energy. Gobta, much like in the original, would have been a quick learner, having discovered how to leap into his own shadow to escape the prison in Dwargon, and as such, I think he would actually be the first person to awaken and unlock the feeling of cursed energy with Gojo's teachings. Seeing Gobta actually have a talent for summoning his direwolf into his shadow, this would remind Gojo of his time with Megami. Well, when Megami was still Megami, and how he could use the 10 Shadows technique. He would think of an idea for Gobta, explaining the idea of how the 10 Shadows fundamentally worked, telling Gobta to slay monsters, and using his newly awakened cursed energy, Gojo would actually help teach Gobta the 10 Shadows technique, or at least the fundamentals of it, believing that with magicules in this world and how he's been able to obtain skills just from his desires, he believes it's possible to recreate the curse techniques he's familiar with, if you have a strong enough will, that is. But enough of that, that's just a little subplot for now. Anyway, Gojo would be continuously enjoying his life now as the chillaxed slimy king. That is, until the adventurers from Blue Moon return, along with them their traveling partner, who would, as we know, be Shizu, the bearer of Ifrit and also a summoned Otherworlder, the other and most common type of Otherworlders in this world. Gojo would have learned from Veldora that he was not the only person from Japan or from his world to be summoned here, saying that it was strange that someone could be reincarnated though, most people arriving with their bodies intact. So Gojo's arrival here is pretty uncommon. Anyway, Gojo doesn't know about Shizu being from Japan yet. This is where the first major fight in the series takes place, that being Ifrit versus Gojo. When Shizu loses control over the seal and her mask fractures, causing Ifrit to be released from within her soul, the demon that had been placed, a spirit within her, by the demon lord Leon Cromwell, Gojo would be forced to face it. The other adventurers and the goblins would watch in horror as Gojo faces off against this legendary demon. Ifrit would throw flames towards Gojo, who would just stand there tanking it. It wouldn't even matter that he has the temperature resistance skill for both cold and heat, because he doesn't even need it. With just his infinity, he could block the flames easily. Ifrit would be horrified as Gojo would just simply keep hopping towards him in his slime form, with the flames not even touching him. Ifrit would freak out, flying and throwing flames and fireballs all around the village. This is when Gojo would get a little more serious, using his teleportation technique as he teleports, then using blue. Using blue, he would suck all the fireballs into one continuous space before consuming them using his predator skill. Using this, he'd absorb the fire, analyzing it, and learning how to create and use fire magic himself. This is when he would continue to attack Ifrit using his own technique of red, blasting Ifrit's flames apart and destroying him with his cursed energy. Gojo would point his slimy hand up, saying, "Red," with a ball of red light forming and ripping through Ifrit's stomach, thus ending Ifrit, and Shizu returning to her original form. Gojo, knowing how he can increase his power by consuming things, would have devoured Ifrit, which would again result in Shizu beginning to rapidly age and her health to deteriorate. Gojo would spend the last moments with Shizu talking about life in Japan, Gojo not explaining the history of cursed spirits or the life he had lived, just simply listening and talking about the pop culture and the way Japan had developed after the war in the era which Shizu had been sent to this world from. He watched her as a smile faded from her face when her life passed away, her last wish telling him that she wants to rest in a comfortable place, somewhere close to her home. Gojo would consume Shizu, and not in the super senior sense of Gojo, I mean in the literal slime sense, thus granting Gojo the body you all saw on the thumbnail. Satoru Gojo-fied Shizu, bringing us to the first end of the introductory arc of Tensura and starting the orc disaster.
Oh, not too shabby. You know, I wouldn't kill you to give me a compliment now and then.
Lord Gojo!
Receiving thought communication from Rhonda. Vocal tone indicates it is a request for aid.
With this sacred treasure, I said it!
I will castrate him if he tries to summon Maharaga. Oh, God. Oh, thank God I got here in time.
Lord Rimuru, it's you! Did you come to save us?
Yeah, well, I guess so. Might as well. Guess you don't need any healing, though.
Oh, come on, please! I didn't even summon the Opstopper!
Fine. What a whiner.
I'll remember this as long as I live. That mask! You'll die for what you did! Ogre Flame!
Oh, that's cute.
Is he dead?
Womp. Have these things ever actually worked for you?
No way! How is that possible?
Although, I guess everyone underestimates each other.
My
Isn't
blades!
that right? I guess I'll give you a little treat as a reward. A little taste of real power.
Domain expansion. Infinite void. against all heavens and earths. I alone am the honored one. Rimuru last time had just defeated Ifrit, and also devoured Shizu, putting her to rest, allowing her to rest within Gojo, and have him give her some comfort, instead of being left in this unsavory fantasy world that she so despised. Since then, Gojo had said farewell to the adventurers from Bloomend, who returned back to let them know about this mysterious slime who's living with these goblins in this peaceful village in the great forest of Jura. In the days since Rimuru's consumption, or Gojo's consumption of Shizu and Ifrit, he had attained a whole variety of new skills. Basically, an entire new playbook that he had never seen before. The ability to use and control flames. This was something that some other Jujutsu sorcerers had had in his past life, like Ryuman Sukana's Fugo, Jogo the Mountainous Curse Spirit, and a few other various flame Jujutsu techniques. But this was the first time that Gojo himself was going to be using it. To get a better grip on how to use his magicules and his skills correctly, he would return to Veldor's cave, where there was a high magicule count and density so he couldn't hurt anyone, and begin training on the control and usage of these new black flames and black lightning. These two skills were skills he had learned after he had become the chief of the Dire Wolves, which had evolved into the Gojo Wolves in this timeline, alongside the goblins. After this, Gojo would be experimenting with these, developing new techniques involving flame control and his Limitless. Some examples of this are using blue to create pockets of flames, so he can generate the flames inside of Limitless and use it like a trap. Similar to how Gojo defends himself by covering his body with his curse technique, he could cover someone else with this. Essentially, he can put infinity covering it around someone and then fill that infinite space with flames, using his magicules. But regardless, it was on any other normal day where he and his goblin hunting party would have been out and about, with him in the Veldor's cave, checking out the new look he's gained with the clothing that the goblins had made with Kaijin and the other dwarves, as well as Shizu's mask. When Gojo placed the mask over himself, his presence seemed to completely vanish. All of his power, his curse energy completely stopped. It all stopped leaking out of his body. This was pretty impressive, needless to say. And so Gojo decided to keep the mask to use it for whenever he would be entering any towns, both for his benefit and to avoid scaring anybody. It was at this point that the clip from the beginning of this video would occur, with Ranga reaching out to Gojo and calling for help, with the goblin hunting party having been intercepted by a mysterious band of strangers. Of course, Gojo wouldn't know this yet. This is when Great Sage would notify him, alerting him to the panic in Ranga's voice. Gojo would run out of the cave, sprinting as he goes from tree to tree in the forest, eventually finding Gobta having just been slashed. Gojo would leap in front of Gobta on the ground, asking him if he's alright, seeing that Gobta had tried to summon some shadows to attack them, but had failed, with him still being fairly inexperienced. Gojo would then put a potion on Gobta, healing his wound and his slash. Gobta would thank Master Gojo, saying, "I won't forget this as long as I live." Anyway, Gojo would just tell him it's no biggie, walking up and helping Ranga and Rigurd, the last two remaining standing members of the party. And so the battle against the ogres would begin. After hearing the update on how the battle had gone so far, Gojo would instruct Ranga and Rigurd to take down the pink-haired ogre, while he would take on the others. "But that leaves 5 ogres for you to take on, Master. Are you really capable of that?" Ranga would ask. Gojo would nod, smiling, saying this will be a cinch, saying that he doesn't want to kill them. He thinks something else is going on here, realizing the huge power gap between these ogres and his hunting party from the village. Gojo would immediately hop into battle, almost teleporting past Benimaru's slash and taking out Shion in an instant. Just using punches and kicks and blasting her away, she would slam into a tree, being knocked unconscious. Next, the ogre, who would become known as Soe, would attack with a piercing strike of his blade. The sword would stop in midair as he forced with all of his might, the sword not even budging, towards Gojo's face. The blue-haired masked Majima would simply walk towards Soe as he gets pushed further and further back, realizing he can't even touch him, as he gets forced into the tree and broken against a tree branch, knocked unconscious. Gojo would then use one of his new skills, the monstrous ability of Poisonous Breath, from the centipede within the cave that he had found Veldora in. He would use this to take out the one who would become known as Kurobe one day, knocking him unconscious and leaving him face to face with the one who would become Benimaru and Hakuro. The two would stand up, saying that they won't allow him to do this any longer, saying that they're going to avenge their village and their comrades. Benimaru being stunned and unable to accept the huge gap in strength between themselves and this Majin. Gojo would laugh, rubbing the back of his head, saying he thinks that there's a misunderstanding going on here, but if they insist, this is when Hakuro would teleport behind him, trying to cut off his head. In the original, Rimuru's arm would have been cut off at this point, even with his body armor he had added to himself. Gojo, without any body armor on, would simply stand there. Hakuro's blade, once again like Soe's, stopping in mid-air and being pushed back. Gojo would turn, lifting his leg and kicking Hakuro in the stomach, knocking the old man back as he sprawls into the ground. Okay, Gramps, I think that's enough from you. The red-haired ogre, the last remaining one, would be in a state of panic, frozen in shock, as Shuna would scream out saying, "Wait," telling Benimaru not to attack and lose his life, knowing that Gojo wouldn't hesitate, Gojo having a steely coolness in his eyes. The pink-haired ogre would run in front, shielding her arms out between her brother, who Gojo had heard her just call, and himself. The pink-haired ogre would then say that this must not be the man they're looking for, asking why. Why would he be the master of those pigs, those orcs who had come and attacked them? Why would he command them to do this when he can so easily take them all out, having not even taken a scratch against all 5 of them, the most elite from the ogre clan? Even with the rest of their village, there's no way they could stand up to someone with this much power. It's at this point that Hakuro would have gone up and lunged towards Gojo, telling the two to get out of there and run, saying for him to take the princess and leave. Gojo would smirk as he holds up his fingers, crossing his pointer finger over his middle one, and creating a strange B-letter shape. At this point, he would open his eyes turning into a blue light from the yellow gold that they were once before, and saying, "Domain expansion. Infinite void." Immediately, everyone in the area would be sucked into Infinite Void, with him using it to overload Hakuro, Benimaru, and Shuna. He would end the domain expansion with everyone in the area being knocked out besides Rigurd, Gabta, and Ranga. He would then order them to pick up the ogres, saying to take them back to the village, saying that he wants to talk to them after they've cooled their heads down. Gojo said they'll probably recover in 3 to 6 days, having only opened it for 0.5 seconds, not really even getting serious. After a couple days, the ogres would come to, and having seen that they were still alive, would explain their story to Rimuru Gojo, explaining to this strange Majin and asking if he really wasn't the one to attack them. In response, Gojo would merely offer the mask that Chizu had left here, asking if it seemed familiar to them. This is when they would look at it, analyzing it, and realizing that it's not quite the same, with this mask having a magic suppression ability that hides your presence. The Majin from before that they had sensed did not have such an ability. Upon realizing that these monsters don't have names either, this is when Gojo would decide to name the Kijin if they became his subordinates, with Benimaru thinking it over and agreeing. The names we're going to say are the same for this sake, just like with the goblins. After Gojo would wake up, he would get an announcement from Great Sage, who he would ask why the hell he was knocked unconscious for. Great Sage would explain to Gojo that naming monsters who are superior to oneself would cause you to use up more magicules, saying that he had used up all of his magic power and had gone unconscious. Gojo would scoff, saying that's the kind of things you should be telling me before I do something rash. Great Sage would sigh, telling Gojo that he's just too reckless. It's after this point that he would talk with Shuna, Benimaru, Soe, and Kurobe, and Hakuro. He would hear that while he was unconscious, a group from the Lizardmen villages had approached the Goblin tribes and were trying to persuade them to join their war effort against the mysterious threat of these orcs that were consuming villages. Gojo would sit up with a start, if you can sit up, as he turns back from his slime form into his human form. Gojo would laugh at the offer that they had told him about, saying that the Lizardmen are unnecessary for their victory. Gojo would say that if the orcs came here, he would just wipe them out all by himself. Then, thinking back on it as he remembers himself getting cut in half by Sukuna, would sigh, as he says that maybe it's not such a bad idea to work with everyone else, with Gojo accepting that they can look into a joint alliance with the Lizardmen, not seeking to bow down to anyone. It's around this point that Trainee, the Dryad, would come to Gojo, asking him to borrow his strength for the Forest of Jura and take down this monstrous threat of the Orc Disaster. She would begin to explain that the Orc Disaster is a Demon Lord level class monster, a unique monster that can rarely ever appear, but can consume everything. Gojo would hold a hand up to his chin thinking about it for a moment, wondering about what he should do here. Although he's never run away from a strong opponent before, he doesn't feel like doing others' dirty work anymore, especially after what had happened to him in his last life, when he worked for the Jujutsu Society? He'd smirk, telling the Dry that he'll take out the threat, but only for his own gain. Trini would smile with her eyes closed, saying that's perfectly acceptable. Meanwhile, within the Lizardman lands, Gabiru had already taken over control from his father, claiming his legendary spear that deemed him king, and was ordering his troops to advance, which would only feed the growing army, making them more powerful. All of this going on under the watchful eye of Demon Lord Clayman. The battle would begin, the Lizardmen being devoured by the army of orcs, who had moved into the Great Forest after they had been kicked into the wastelands, their people having to eat each other to survive. When the masked Majin had approached them, offering them a future, this hadn't been what they had in mind. But it was too late. The Orc Lord had already used its telekinetic power and ability to control the hundreds of thousands of orcs all around them, forcing them to feast on their dead comrades, absorbing their strength, and becoming even more powerful under this unique monster's unique abilities. As the Lizardmen are getting defeated, suddenly flames would cover the battlefield as the Kijin would arrive, with Gojo floating above them. Gojo's hair would be flowing in the wind, long with a silvered gleam, as he looks across the field with his 6 eyes, using Great Sage to analyze all the orcs to find his opponent. As the army of orcs would draw closer, this is when Gojo would release his black flames and black lightning, casting them down upon the land and killing hundreds in a single attack. Gojo would finally meet his eyes with the Orc Disaster, the unique monster who was the cause of this entire mess, at least for now. Gojo would teleport forward right into his face directly in the orc's mouth, as he'd pull his right fist back, connecting it with the orc's jaw. With infinity coating his fist, the cursed energy would pound into this orc, causing its fat rolls to wrinkle, getting folded onto the ground, as the mass of flesh gets sent flying from Gojo's punches. As it gets sent flying, Gojo would hold up his hand, as he envisions in his mind 2 different energies colliding, blue and red, creating the imaginary attack, Hollow Purple. He would pull his fingers out, pulling his other arm back as if though he was cocking a shell into an armistice, blasting the Orc Disaster with a full power Hollow Purple. The Kijin and the Lizardmen would be shocked, watching as a hole the size of a cannonball appears, ripping through the Orc Disaster's torso and right arm. The Orc Disaster would rage, ripping down with its other hands and begins consuming its fellow brethren around it, healing as a disgusting fleshy sound of crunching and bone would fill the air, its own flesh beginning to regenerate from its gluttony. The Orc Disaster would rage, saying he's going to eat him, as he runs forward at full speed towards Gojo. Gojo would stand there as he tries to wrap his mouth around the slime, with Gojo saying the only one here who's going to be eaten is you, transforming out of his human form into the blue slime figure and using Predator. Gojo would begin to coat the Orc Disaster with his slime, slowly devouring his flesh faster than he can regenerate. The Orc Disaster would try peeling Gojo off, ripping at the slime, but couldn't even grab him as it wriggled around on his flesh, consuming him slowly, as if though 2 beasts were in the forest, fighting for survival. The screams of the Orc Disaster could be heard as its flesh and bone became one, cleaned bones appearing on its hand and arms, its limbs being slowly eaten inwards by Gojo, who would consume its power, its skills, and the Orc Disaster's soul. In this fashion, the orcs would be released from the control of the unique monster, as Gojo would add a Demon Lord seed into himself, giving himself the ability in the future to evolve into a true Demon Lord, as well as attaining a variety of other skills possessed by the orcs, and the unique skill of the Orc Disaster. Clayman, who had been watching through this crystal ball, would be angered, watching his plan completely fall apart to this random slime. Clayman would pound his hand into the desk, screaming that his plan was getting overturned. No matter. If this way isn't working, I'll just have to try another approach. With the war having ended, Gojo having succeeded, and the goblin village he was a part of now being hailed as heroes, the Kijin would return back with Gojo. And in the weeks to come, many of the Lizardmen, such as Gabiru and those who had joined him in the coup, would have been sent there as outcasts. The decision of what to do with the remaining orcs was now what was on the table. The Great Juro Alliance would be brought up, with them deciding what to do as the races who live in this forest. Ultimately, Benimaru would leave it up to Gojo as his master to decide what to do with the orcs, with Gojo voting that they should keep them as a labor force, saying that if they get rid of them or kill them all, it'll just mean more work for those who had survived, saying that they should earn their redemption by their own two hands. And now in the weeks after, the orcs would have helped refix the marshes they had themselves destroyed, while also being taken under Gojo's wing, with Gojo beginning road construction between his town and Worgon. In just these few weeks and months, the city of Gojo would have grown in massive ways, with him even having drawn the attention of Demon Lord Carrion, the Beastmaster and a Demon Lord from the neighboring country of Eurazania. Of course, he also had drawn attention from multiple other Demon Lords after they had witnessed his battle against the Orc disaster, the first to come and visit herself being Milim Nava. One day, Gojo's Six Eyes and Great Sage would go off as he detects a large amount of magicules heading his way. He would immediately teleport to get out of the city, knowing that they're coming after him, wondering what this is. An insane smile would flicker on his face, as the magicules would crash into the ground, causing a huge crater to form near the tree where he and Shizu had spent moments talking about Japan and their last life. Of course, without the cursed spirits and stuff. When the pink-haired Lolly Demon Lord arrives, Gojo would have an insane grin on his face, as he licks his lips, practically thinking, "This is gonna be one hell of a fight." Rising out of the crater, this pink-haired Twin-Tails girl would start laughing maniacally. Suddenly, Shion, Shuna, and Benimaru would appear, with them lunging at Gojo, pulling him out of the way, and telling Rango to take their master and flee. The Kijin would be easily blasted away. Gojo would grit his teeth, saying to get out of there, saying he's got this, as he stands up, brushing the dust off of his clothes. In the weeks since the Orc disaster's fall, he had commissioned Shuna, who was actually fairly good at weaving and creating clothing. As it turns out, she had been working with materials back in the original Ogre Village. She had created a new outfit for Gojo. Gojo having a black jacket with a button on top, similar to that of the outfit he wore as a teacher and sensei at Jujutsu High. This was what was most comfortable for him, and he was happy to be wearing the familiar outfit once again. Although this time, as he was now more relaxed and didn't have students following him everywhere, aside from Gobta, who was getting trained by both him and Hakuro in swordsmanship, and him teaching him the 10 Shadows technique, slowly, Gojo would wear it a bit differently, with his button being unbuttoned and having an undershirt underneath, making it look more like a overcoat than a buttoned-up, tight-knit jacket. But regardless of his looks, Milim would be there for one thing and one thing only. That being a fight, a magnificent duel between the hero who had slain the Orc disaster and her, one of the 10 great demon lords. Milim would then aim a Drago Buster at Gojo. Gojo would stand there as the attack would come closer to his face, with him tanking it with infinity, completely unfazed by the attack. Great Sage would be screaming in Gojo's head about how stupid and reckless this was, with Gojo smirking and saying it was worth testing. As he smirks, telling Great Sage that there's no risk, no reward. He'd hold his finger out at the giggling Demon Lord as he then says, "Red," blasting Milim into the atmosphere with a red attack. Milim would laugh, not having so much fun in ages, barely even being scratched by the technique. Gojo would teleport above her using a double hammer fist on her back, her spine getting turned upwards as she gets sent flying back towards the ground. Milim would laugh, releasing her Drago Buster again with more power, this time releasing multiple shots as Gojo would feel the infinity cracking, just like as if though she was using a simple domain, simply outperforming his energy consumption with her magical energy. Insane. Gojo would teleport out of the way as he's thinking about using a domain expansion, wondering if he could even beat her using a domain. It's at this point that Gobta would show up, carrying honey freshly farmed from their new bee culturing zone. Milim would turn at wondering what the hell that yellow stuff was, with Gojo looking panicked, saying, No, that's my dessert research." The look of horror on his face would make Milim even more interested, as she then blitzes, speeding past Gojo and towards Gobta. Gobta, who would have been just about to bite into the honey, licking his fingers, would scream as he sees the flying object coming towards him at Mach 10. She would crash face first into the jar, licking her face as she feels what this strange attack is, wondering what this delicious substance is. And she would completely forget about their fight. Gojo would have his hands shaking as he feels like he could have totally died just then, falling back to the ground and walking up telling Milim that if she destroys his town, there won't be anything good like that honey left to eat. She would lick her lips saying there's more good food here, realizing that she must be completely uncultured, as he pats her on the back, seeing her more like a kid, sighing as he says, "All right, let's go get some lunch." Alright guys, cool your heads. Besides, I have skills I want to test out too. Devour all. Reverse grip technique. Gluttony. He just dissolved all those scales instantly. Leave Charybdis to me. At this point, you guys are just getting in the way of my attacks.
But we can still help you.
Just kick back for a little bit. And besides, it's already completely regenerated. If it uses another wide-scale attack like that, I'm not confident I can protect all of you. So just go back and listen to Benimaru's orders, okay? Sound good? Now, time to see if you prayed today. Whoa! Oh, wow. Hey guys, welcome back to Volume 3. For that time, Satoru Gojo got reincarnated as a slime. If you guys have no idea what's going on and just got here, make sure you check out the previous 2 volumes, with this being the 3rd entry in the series. If you guys want to figure out the story of what happened to Satoru Gojo after his death to Ryumen Sukuna. Anyway, continuing on from where we left off last time, let's get back right into the story. Upon the end of the Great War with the Orcs, a meeting is called between the races of the Forest of Jura. Rimuru's faction with the Goblins, Hobgoblins, and Kijin included, the Lizardmen, the Orcs who had survived, and the Dryad trainee. Wishing to have the matter settled immediately, the chairman of the meeting, who would be Rimuru, who had contributed the most to the battle, or, well, Gojo in this timeline, would state that he's not interested in blaming any of the remaining survivors for their actions, reiterating what I talked about last time with his choice to leave the 150,000 survivors to help rebuild the destruction within the marshes that they had caused on their march. Gojo would then reiterate that if anyone wishes to see them punished, then they must take it up with him. Basically, Gojo says that if you think you're stronger than me, I'll take what you're saying as law. No one stepped up to that after seeing him use 2 fingers to poke a hole through space and through a giant orc disaster. Anyway, to prevent a repeat of the events that led to the entire invasion to begin with, Rimuru would intend to have the other 3 factions within the forest offer to do trade and food specifically with the orcs. The Lizardmen can provide fish and water, the Dryad fruit and vegetables, and Gojo will house them, basically keeping the labor force as close as possible. However, in exchange, the orcs will be dispersed through the forest and be working to rebuild and modernize the settlements within the forest. It's crop sharing. He basically just used crop sharing to keep the orcs around so they didn't have to die. The official alliance would have been recognized by Trainee, with the Dryad Trainee declaring Rimuru Gojo as the new Chancellor of the Great Forest of Jura, to which everyone except Gojo would unanimously agree sounds great. Betcha that little strength comment came back to bite you, huh, buddy? He was not excited, considering the big shots of the world to all be scum. He has now joined them as a Chancellor. Anyway, Gojo basically can't refuse at this point, with him being placed as the figurehead of the Great Forest Alliance. After the meeting ended, this would be when a confrontation between Benimaru, the general of Rimuru's forces, and the son and the new Orc King, after the passing of the Orc disaster, would have a discussion. He's fully aware of the horror and crimes that the Orcs as a race had committed to the Ogre village, and he felt that his lack of punishment was unacceptable, asking Benimaru to attain revenge for his people by taking his head. Benimaru would just sigh to the representative of the Orcs, saying that if he had listened to a word his master had said back there, Gojo's decision had been to spare them, and Benimaru had no interest in fighting him, telling the Orc that if he really wanted to attain some atonement for what their race had done, then he should continue to work hard for his master. It's after this point that brings us back to where we ended off the last episode, with the arrangement between Dwargon and the newly unnamed nation at the time of this episode starting, would form an alliance, with Gazel Dwargo himself coming with his Pegasus Knights and forming a meeting with Rimuru, the leader of this unnamed nation. Gojo himself, on the meanwhile, would be delivered Vesta in a few days upon the treaty, with this drunk being the same guy who, back on his first journey to the city of dwarves, had dumped a bunch of booze on him. Not like he was complaining, considering he was too busy enjoying his seating position, and, well, it's not like he could really get dirty anyway as a slime. Gojo would ask if this drunkard would actually be useful in any way, to which Kaijin and Gaza would both stand up and vouch for Vesta, saying that he is quite the ingenious mind when he's got something to put his mind towards. Anyway, Vesta would have been completely destroyed after he had been kicked out of his position and was looking for a fresh start. This would begin the new cultivation plans for more healing and Hapokte herbs within Veldora's cave to create more full potions and potentially water them down into low potions, according to Vesta's advice, so as to not lower the value of potions on the entire market. For the sake of the story, we're going to be calling the nation Tempest just to make things clear for people so you know where I'm talking about, but I'm pretty sure that Gojo actually wouldn't name the city this. Some ideas that I think it could be named would either be after his best friend, like Suguru for the city, and then a different name for the country. So the main capital of Tempest as a nation, or maybe he could just call it the nation of Jura, as in the Jura forest. But I'm pretty sure he would name the city something like Suguru, or something related to that. I'm not sure, but for the relevance of the story, we're just going to continue to call it Tempest. You can all come up with some cool ideas in the comment section on what Gojo would name the city if he was to be the monster king in this universe. Honestly, I think if I were to come up with an original name that I think would be cool, maybe the nation of Aether, as in Aether, like the connection between the sky and earth, since Gojo's whole moniker is that throughout the heavens and earths he's the strongest, so having his own city to protect now kind of grounds him. I don't know if that's too punny, but anyway, if you guys have a better idea, let me know down in the comment section. Moving on, after Milim and Rimuru and Gojo would become friends, this would be when the Beast Master would have sent one of his own minions, that being one of the three Beastketeers, Phobio. Phobio would have come in with the same condescending attitude that he would have in the original, saying he was there to subjugate the monsters under the name of Eurazania and the Beastmaster Carrion. It's upon Phobio's rather rude and loud introduction that he would be the one to disrespect the demon lord Milim, who had taken a liking to the city. With Gojo being preoccupied being basically the president of this monster village, Milim would have dug Phobio's face into his newly paved stone streets, going right down the middle of town. Upon Phobio's resurrection from Gojo using his full potions, he would continue to act like a bratty little kid, saying that he'll come back with the full force of the Beastmaster Carrion at his disposal. Milim would ask Rimuru if she could just kill him now. Gojo would think about it for a moment before deciding to let him go. When his aides would ask him why he was doing this, Gojo would say he was curious to see how powerful the average demon lord was, thinking he could get a good gauge on strength after fighting Milim, and now wanting to see what this carrion was like. In reality though, this wouldn't have been advice from Great Sage or anything like that. It was just Gojo looking to get himself into another fight. That night, Phobio and his men who had been now camping in the forest would be approached by a couple of masked Majin. These Majin, footmen in tier, introducing themselves as being a part of the moderate Harlequin alliance. It's at this point when they're talking about how annoyed and how much he claims he wants power that Phobio would be again seduced by them, just like he had in the original timeline. With this having hooked their bait, the Majin would guide Phobio to the Seal of Charybdis. Charybdis being a spiritual life form that was created through the magicals of Veldora, the true storm dragon. This essentially making Charybdis a sibling of Gojo in this universe, which we discovered later through Rimuru, and in the original timeline, Rimuru believes the reason he was even attacking the city was because of Veldora inside of himself. Anyway, enough of that. Phobio would be absorbed into Charybdis, with Charybdis taking over his flesh and gaining a physical body, turning into a giant shark-like dragon. This would begin to fly through the sky, being discovered in just a few mere days, creating chaos in Tempest. At the same time, this is when the Pegasus Knights I had mentioned at the end of last episode would have been sent to Tempest, with Gazel Dworgon being particularly interested in Rimuru's activities. Gojo would be already excited for this fight with Gojo saying that he'll take out the dragon himself, telling them that there's no need for their assistance. The rest of his forces would disagree, with Ranga, Shion, and Benimaru and the rest of his forces basically begging for a chance to shine. Gojo would sigh, with him realizing that if he gave in here, and went himself, there'd be no way he could tell Milim not to, as she had already been declined by him when she asked if she could just go take it out. Gojo at that time had just wanted to fight Charybdis himself, but now he really didn't have a good reason, having told Milim that someone as great as a demon lord shouldn't be attacking some meager pest that was after his town, saying this was their issue. Essentially, his subordinates would use the same logic he had used on Milim on himself. The result of the ongoing battle would show Charybdis' intense regeneration and power, with his scales ripping through both his own forces and the Pegasus Knights who were now defending against Charybdis. It's at this point that we see the scene from the opening, with Gojo himself appearing and using his new skill he had gained when he had combined Predator and Starving from the Orc disaster when he had absorbed it. This being his new skill, Gluttony. Gojo was particularly excited about this new skill, specifically because Gluttony has the ability to nullify and devour attacks, while also absorbing them into himself. This means he can now use the abilities of his new slime body without transforming, giving him valuable time in battle. Gojo's also been thinking about how Gluttony can apply using cursed energy and other techniques like a simple domain, but he hasn't gotten that far yet. Just experimenting with the skill for now. Gojo versus Charybdis would be an intense battle, with him using cursed energy and trying a hollow purple on it, and it doing essentially nothing, with the magical density of Charybdis basically eating through the hollow purple. It's at this point that Gojo is once again being presented with the difference between cursed energy and magicule energy rates, basically just being the fact that magicules can overpower cursed energy in its entirety. Just like how Milim was able to just shatter through his infinity with just a basic attack spell, with just how much magicule she possesses being the same case here. His hollow purple simply just didn't have enough power to shatter through Charybdis' defense. But anyway, it's at this point that another half a day would pass, with the Pegasus Knights becoming exhausted and the rest of Tempest's forces basically becoming the same. This is when we would see Phobio's inner voice starting to leak out, where he's screaming, "Milim!" Gojo would get annoyed, asking if Milim is asleep, while standing over her poking her with a stick under the tree. Milim would quickly stand up saying she was meditating, deciding after Rimuru explains that it turns out this guy was after her, that she would take care of it. Gojo would sigh, watching, wondering what she's going to do. When Milim gets up into the sky, no one would believe the sight before their eyes. A massive attack of magicules would obliterate Charybdis, with Gojo having asked her to try and spare Phobio to not anger the other demon lord. This would have caused a burnt Phobio to be tossed to the ground, with Gojo catching him using his infinity to teleport there and catch Phobio for setting him down, splashing another healing potion on him. Milim would laugh, with him saying, "I guess that was restraint, huh?" Gojo thinking he's got a long way to go now. That is, until he can reach that level of power. Once Phobio was awake, he would beg for everyone's forgiveness, basically bowing and falling on the ground, finally starting to act like an actual representative of a country. That is, until he would explain how he became Charybdis, based off of the two clowns he had met named Tyr and Footman. Gabiru, Trainee, and Benimaru would all confirm that they've had their own run-ins with the moderate Harlequin Alliance, with them all talking about the cases so far, specifically with how Gelmud had worked with them during the Orc Lord incident. Based on this information, Rimuru would conclude that this group is a mysterious jack-of-all-trades group that sows chaos. Gojo thinking it must be some sort of mercenary group that has some strange or unknown goal that must be affected by their town's existence. Milim would openly suspect Clayman, saying that he loves scheming and it's probably his fault to begin with. But regardless, Phobio would still blame himself, although it was his fault, and would offer his life to Rimuru, basically throwing him to his mercy. Both Gojo and Milim would have no real interest in killing him. However, this would be when Demon Lord Carrion would show up, the golden-haired man standing over 7 feet tall. Apparently, Phobio's subordinates who he had left in the forest last night before he had turned into Charybdis would have reported to Carrion Phobio's actions and how he's been angering this town. Basically, he would be pretty pissed off. As soon as he arrives on the scene, he would apologize to Rimuru and then slam Phobio into the ground. Gojo would laugh, saying that if he's really here for some vengeance, well, he wouldn't mind going a round or two with him. Carrion would look at Gojo before saying he passes with a smile. With this being the end of the incident, to Gojo's disappointment, he would accept the Demon Lord's apology. Gojo would laugh, then saying that if he has something else he could offer him, he would be interested in a trade or non-aggression pact with Carrion for Urizania. Tempest and Urizania would then create their trade and non-aggression pact, with the two shaking hands, basically sealing the deal. Fueba would be dragged off through a teleportation spell, now once again heavily wounded with blood squirting out of his forehead. With the threat finally being over, Gojo would sigh, saying they can finally take it easy for a little bit. The next day, following Charybdis' defeat, the Juro-Tempest Federation would hold a festival to celebrate, mostly by chopping up and grilling all of the megalodon meat that they had attained from the summons of Charybdis. Meanwhile, Kaijin and Kurobe would be harvesting the scales from the giant monster that had been left behind and are now trying to create armor and weapons out of Charybdis' scales. In this timeline, this is where Millen would bring up the idea to Rimuru of deciding he should become a Demon Lord. Gojo would laugh, saying he actually wouldn't be against being called a Demon Lord, wondering if there's anything special about being one to begin with though. Gojo would reply to Millen, saying, I actually don't have anything against becoming a Demon Lord. It sounds cool, but also really annoying. I just don't want a bunch of self-proclaimed heroes coming to try and slay me all the time. Not quite my idea of a fun time. Gojo would then take another sip of his sweet sake. It's at this point that Millen would actually remember something, saying that she has something to do before she would rudely get up and leave, exploding out of the door and pushing it down, causing Gojo to sigh again at her lack of common sense. However, when Gojo retires for the night, falling into a deep slumber, he would have an interesting dream. He would have a dream of the 5 children that Shizu's memories had left behind when he had absorbed her. Those being the children she had been teaching at a school in the Kingdom of Ingracia. With this dream being the sign, Gojo would take it as a sign from Shizu that he could finally take some time to rest and take care of her regrets. With him having gathered a plethora of subordinates who've all gathered strength and power together, having even taken on Charybdis, and even held their own for over a day and a half before Milim took it out, Rimuru could safely leave Tempest in their hands. Gojo would announce his interest in traveling to the people of Tempest, with him saying that he will return and is just going to complete some regrets of an old friend, with Gojo only allowing Ranga to accompany him on their journey. Rimuru would be riding Ranga, with his speed being the optimal way to travel here, considering that Gojo has never been to Ingracia before, meaning he can't use the teleportation technique that he has access to using Infinity into locations he either knows where they are or where he's been before. Like how he was able to transport to Jujutsu High in a matter of seconds after taking out Jogo with Itadori Yuji in tow in his last life. This would be the first time that Rimuru would have left the forest of Jura without an accompanying party, with just him and Ranga traveling. This is Rimuru's first step, and Gojo's first step, in meeting with the head of the Freedom Association, the Grand Master of the Free Guild, better known as the Adventurers Guild, a giant international organization that works across the world of Tensura to protect humanity from monsters. The name of the Grand Master being Yuki Kagurazaka, a student that Shizu had worked alongside and trained and raised herself after she had retired as an adventurer. At least, thankfully, Rimuru had a connection with Fuse, Gojo having met Fuse and the other adventurers who had intervened in Tempest earlier. Rimuru would easily get an introductory letter from him, which allows him to even make it into Yuki's office without having to do much footwork. Personally, Gojo would be more interested in the capital of Ingracia's technology and their wealth, with them possessing thin panes of glass, higher levels of architecture, and just creativity that already surpassed the other places in this world he has seen so far, even rivaling that of Dwargon. Of course, he had only spent a few days in that city anyway, but I digress. Anyway, when Yuki would arrive walking to his office saying that he had been prepared to meet with him, his face would change, seeing Shizu's mask on this stranger's face. Yuki would kick off the ground, throwing his right leg up into the air and kicking it at Gojo's head. Gojo would simply stand there as his foot stops moving. Yuki's eyes would narrow, wondering what the hell this technique is. At this point, Rimuru, Gojo, would then put Yuki's leg back on the ground, putting his hand up on the side and pushing it away. Yuki would then ask why does he look like his master Shizu, with Rimuru removing the mask from his face. Gojo would smile, saying it's because that he killed and ate Shizu, taking her form. Yuki would be promptly overcome with anger as he attacks Rimuru again, trying to use Magicals and half shatter this barrier. But, again, he would be blocked. Rimuru would then catch him off guard by saying a reference he himself had used with Shizu, being a manga reference of "I'm not a bad slime," referencing to a video game from his time. It's at this point Yuki would realize that Rimuru is another otherworlder, coming from the same world of Japan that he himself and Shizu had come from. Yuki and Gojo would get along even better than the original Rimuru had in canon, with both of them being these nonsensical and whimsical types, who can get deadly serious. After this, similar events would occur, with Gojo giving Yuki copies of the manga he was wondering about from their original world, with Yuki not even being able to finish reading some of these before their chat would end. He would ask Gojo if he's looking for a way back to their world. Suddenly, flashes of the cursed spirits, the attacks on Japan, and his two students, Yuji and Yuta fighting Sukuna, would flash in his mind. Gojo would narrow his eyes, saying that by the time he would make it back there, there'd be no point, saying that for now he's just there to deal with Shizu's regrets. Yuki would go on saying that he believes it's definitely possible to return to their world, talking about the legends of monsters and dragons from their world, saying that there must be a way that monsters from this world had snuck through the barrier between dimensions. But Yuki would stop, with Gojo's eyes being serious about cutting off this topic. Yuki would smile, looking at Gojo's eyes, saying he's never seen eyes as beautiful as his before. Gojo would smirk, saying that he'll take it as a compliment. Yuki would chuckle at this comment, saying that he'll arrange for Gojo to take Shizu's old job as an instructor at the academy, where she had been teaching the otherworlder children of Class S. Gojo would smile, saying it's guess that he puts his teacher face back on, with Gojo returning to the classroom as a sensei. Last time Gojo met with the Demon Lord of Destruction herself, Milim, or Milim. She is one of the oldest and most powerful demon lords. The pink-haired demon lord Lali would have absolutely obliterated Gojo, turning his confidence upside down. But little after that, we would see Charybdis, one of the children of Veldora, the dragon who named Gojo in this life as Rimuru, would have arrived at Tempest, attacking the city that Gojo had been helping build with the power of his jujutsu and his friends. Gojo would have defended it though, defeating Charybdis and placing himself on the notice of all of the demon lords as a growing power within the great forest of Jura. Our story takes place the night after Milim would have quickly flown off, telling Rimuru that she would let the other demon lords know not to bother him, since they were besties now. Gojo would sigh, saying, "Whatever," as she flies off into the distance. That night, Satoru would have a dream though. He would be looking down, realizing his hair was a deep shade of black, a color it had never been before. Looking up, he would realize that this was Shizu's memories. The memories of the body of the woman who he had absorbed after coming into this world and gained human form. Within this dream vision, Gojo would see several children, one with black hair like herself, one with red and orangish hair, and spiky long locks, someone else sticking their nose in a book, and a blonde girl playing with dolls. Oh, and there was a blonde kid who was much more tall than the others just playing in the back. What were they all up to and what was going on? He had no idea, but when he woke up, he would feel tears streaming down his face. He had no idea why, but seeing these memories reminded him. It reminded him of his time when he was a teacher himself, and his time with his students back at Jujutsu High. He would see images of Itadori Yuji, Megami, and Nobara, along with the second-year students like Yuta, in his mind, remembering the time that he had spent cultivating them, and hoping that they were all right, not knowing truly for certain whether they had ever been able to defeat the man known as the King of Curses. But that's all in the past. There's nothing he can do about it now anyway, so he should just focus on his life in the world now. But he still couldn't get this nagging feeling out of his head. Why did he feel so uneasy? His body, it was shaking, as if though there was something that he wanted to do desperately. The next day he would alert Ranga, saying that he feels like he needs to finish Shizu's will, and that there's something that he has to do to be truly put at ease. Now that Charybdis had been taken down and it seems like Tempest was in a stable position, he hoped to leave it in the hands of the dwarves and the other goblins to continue working on constructing it. Gojo would quickly put up a barrier around the entire city using Infinity, being able to create a barrier now using Magicals and the help of Great Sage to apply Infinity into that space.
This was something that he had learned to do with his combination of magicules and cursed energy. He actually got this idea after seeing how Malim had ripped through his infinity almost instantly, being able to surpass the power of the world-cutting slash that had ended his life in a mere moment. If he hadn't had regeneration in the body of a slime, he probably would have died back then. But because of this ability and his great sage, which lets him learn even faster than just having the 6 eyes, he was able to see how Malim had done this, wrapping herself in magicules, which, as you could tell, was a higher power source than cursed energy. Magicules themselves filling everything, both positive and negative. By combining these two and creating this null-like energy, and even force, that's what created magicules. So as a magicule, he could use it as negative or positive energy, hence why healing magic exists while also attack spells do. Basically being able to have a higher level of power because he can turn his cursed energy pool into magicules, essentially giving him 2 sources of magicules that he can pull from. So Gojo has become stronger in how he manipulates his cursed energy. Through this, he would create the barrier technique before leaving Tempest, telling them that they should be able to get out since his infinity has the ability to automatically detect threats. Gojo would feel at ease now. Remembering how safe he felt when he had entered Tengen's barriers, he now hoped that he could provide the same cover for the citizens of Tempest. Gojo would sigh, feeling a sense of relief. Ranga, let's go. We've got to get to Ingracia. And just like that, Gojo and Ranga would be on their way, with the goblins waving and cheering, hoping for their great one's return. Anyway, the Honored One would first head to the Kingdom of Bloomend, realizing that it's not going to be easy to get in contact with the students that Shizu was teaching. Through Shizu's memories, Gojo had learned that she had been teaching in the Kingdom of Ingracia, the same capital city where the main head branch of the Adventurers Guild was, the Freedom Association. Gojo would first need a letter of recommendation so that he could meet with the headmaster of the Freedom Academy, the school that had taken in the otherworlder children, kids who had been summoned to this world, if he wanted to become a teacher for them. So that's where he'd go first. Heading to Bloomend, he'd meet with Fuse. Of course, just like in the original manga, we would have a little sub-arc where he becomes an adventurer, with him even taking on a greater demon as a final test and obliterating it using blue, ripping the demon apart in front of the other adventurer candidates. The tester would be horrified looking at this masked man, with Gojo using Shizu's mask to conceal his magicules. He would laugh, saying he was just getting a little warmed up, before Fuse would come out and see the destruction that he had caused, telling Rimuru that please don't destroy this entire city. Gojo would laugh, saying, "Fuse, you know I'd never do that. Come on, man, line up a little." Fuse would grumble, saying that if he's here, there's probably some real trouble coming. No, nothing like that. I just need your help with getting a pass to meet the guild head of the Adventurers Guild. Yuki Kagarazaka, of course. Fuse would be surprised, wondering what Rimuru would want to meet that guy for, the leader of the entire Adventurer Guild. But, oh well, he knew Rimuru wasn't a bad person, having protected his adventurers and heard of his great deeds, and of course having met him in person before. Fuse would sigh and reluctantly decide that writing an introduction letter wouldn't be that bad of an idea. What's the harm? It's not like Yuki Kagarazaka's a pushover either. And with that, Gojo and Ranga would be on their way to Ingracia. One of the first things that Gojo would notice as he enters the city is how much more advanced it is than some of the other kingdoms he's been to so far, being Bloomend and Dwargon. Dwargon's pretty advanced all in itself, but he never had seen glass like this, looking as he would take his finger gently tracing the glass on a window shop, seeing how thin it was, how expertly crafted. How is this even possible in this medieval world? Gojo would simply wonder these things. Being a fan of tourism and travel himself, he'd think he'd definitely have to get some souvenirs for Gobta and the others. Gojo would laugh, thinking about the time that he had realized Gobta had actually had a potential to learn the 10 Shadows Curse technique, thinking how hilarious it was that this goblin he had met was actually proficient with shadow manipulation, the same technique that Megami had used. He hoped that the Grand Divine General would never have to be summoned. If it showed up in this world, I could probably take care of it pretty easily. These would be Gojo's thoughts as he's being escorted to the elevator by the front desk attendant who had taken his request and his letter from Fuse, the Bloomend Adventurers Guild head. And with that, she would guide Satoru up to the Guild Master's office, where he would finally come face to face with Yuki Kagarazaka, one of Shizu's students, the other being Hinata Sakaguchi. He had known from Shizu's memories that they had left her at a fairly early time, but that was many years ago. In fact, the two of them, Hinata and Yuki, were about as old as he was when he had first died, so they were approximately the same age at this point. And even then, Gojo could tell, even without the 6 eyes, that this Yuki guy was no joke. Yuki would smile, looking up as he says, "Yeah, who is it? Who's come to visit me at this time of day? I didn't have any appointments set." Yuki's golden and red-flicked eyes would watch over Gojo, seeing the mask that Shizu once wore. However, his body was more masculine, his hair a silvery white. Yuki would feel shivers, as if though he could feel Gojo's eyes peering right through him, staring at his very soul. Yuki would stand up smirking, saying, "So, how come you look like Shizue Izawa, huh?" Yuki would say, his eyes now glowing with magic power. Gojo would simply say in a coy tone, "Well, I suppose I know her because I ate her." At that point, Yuki would play no games as the desk would go flying, crashing into the wall as he flies forward, throwing a kick. Gojo would simply stand there holding up his hand as the kick would barely even get close to him, with Yuki's eyes widening, seeing as he can't even make contact with him. Gojo would be impressed, watching his golden magic power receding from his infinity. It looks like you're not quite as strong as her, but it was a good test anyway. Gojo would sigh as he puts his hand down. "Sorry about that. I worded that a little poorly." On purpose, might I add, since he wanted to see how strong Yuki was. He would then say his signature line of, "I'm not a bad slime," the same line he used to rizz up Shizu originally. And Yuki would recognize this, asking if he's from another world or from Japan, just like they were. Gojo would nod, saying, "Yep, that's me. I came from another world just like you guys, but I didn't get to keep my body when I got here. When Shizu passed away, she asked to be rest within me because she didn't feel safe in this world. She didn't want to be consumed by it. So I absorbed her and subsequently gained this form. It's actually pretty similar to my original body, although I had to make a few alterations. I just wasn't quite comfortable looking that attractive, you know? I mean, me and Suguru would get a little zesty back in the day, but nah, I didn't think it was a good idea." Yuki would laugh at Gojo, with the two of them talking about the manga and anime from his time, with Gojo still being a pop culture nerd, just like he was in the original, although maybe not quite as much as Yuji. Gojo, having the 6 eyes, would actually have even better copies of the manga that Great Sage would produce, creating copies of paper and creating manga volumes just for Yuki to read, updating him on all the chapters that he had been updated on. Unfortunately, there were quite a few missing, since at the time he was always getting called out for missions. So while the images were far more detailed and akin to the original art, there were some chapters that would just be missing, since he would just skip them and move on to the next one in the next weekly volume. It was kind of funny. But eventually, the two would begin to trust each other, with Yuki saying that he approves Gojo becoming the professor of the kids Shizue used to teach before she went on her journey to find Leon, since Ifrit was becoming unstable. Gojo would sigh, holding up his hand, saying, "Don't worry about it. I've already contained Ifrit. One of the skills I have happens to be very adept at sealing things." Of course, he had to eat him, but he didn't want to say it like that, and sealing things just sounded much cooler. Yuki would trust Gojo, saying that's alright, and he understands why he came back, explaining that the kids don't have much time left, saying that unfortunately they were imperfect summons, beings that had been summoned to this world but couldn't maintain their magicules, and so they'd eventually die. Gojo would nod, wondering if these kids had already given up on trying to live, seeing as everyone around them was telling them that they were already fated to die. Each student would introduce themselves slowly, with him starting off, of course, with Kenya. Kenya just waving a sword and running around like the Energizer Bunny. There would be Chloe, who would be reading her book, Gale, the taller one, and Ryota, the quiet-looking black-haired kid. Oh, and Alice, the puppet player. She's sitting there playing with her toy dolls. Anyway, eventually it would become clear to Gojo that these kids had zero respect for him whatsoever. "What's the point of trying to learn stuff when we're going to be dead anyway?" Kenya would say. Gojo would sigh, saying, you know, you don't seem to have much hope, you know.
I promise that I will make sure you all survive. You'll be so old one day that your hair is just as white as mine. Gojo would decide to run a little test. Great Sage and his 6 eyes giving off this clear indication of disruption in their magicules. He could clearly tell that there was something not letting them align their power correctly. Like a person with cursed energy just letting it flow out endlessly. As if though there was no valve to block it. All of that energy leaking out of them eventually, of course, would cause them to perish. And so we would have the same one-on-one duel, with Gojo deciding to use this as a way to both show that he's the strongest, while also gaining some respect from these children. Of course, Kenta would begin using his fire magic and his sword, which couldn't even touch Gojo, but to make it interesting, Gojo would say he can simply land a single blow on him, then he'll give him the victory. Gojo would stand there still, watching as Kenya begins to swing his sword, easily dodging and weaving, not revealing any cards up his sleeve just yet. Gojo would let him run around for a while to see if he could burn off some of that energy, but nothing seemed to be working. It was pretty clear just from watching that those magicules were not aligning, even if he was using them. They just were too much coming out of Kenya. Anyway, eventually the timer would run out and Ryota would call it. Kenya would end it off screaming, saying that he's going to have his revenge as he runs off crying. After that, Gojo would feel a little guilty, but it would be Chloe's turn. Chloe would put down her book, sighing, saying, "Fine, but if I hurt you, you can't blame me, alright?" Gojo would laugh, saying there's no way anything she could do would possibly hurt him. Chloe would take this as a challenge, getting a little annoyed as she casts water magic, with him realizing she's a spellcaster. Chloe would use water magic and create a tornado around Rimuru, using the blades of water just like she did in the original, and begin spinning them around inside of the vortex, with her shouting that if he promises to leave her alone and stop this nonsense, she'll let him go without hurting him. Gojo would simply walk forward into the blades as they can't even dare to begin to cut through infinity, the water shattering without him even having to use his cut resistance skill from being a slime. And with that, the water magic would dissipate, causing Chloe to have tears in her eyes and start crying as she gets upset that her spell didn't work, her confidence blowing back on her and also embarrassing her. Everyone would have tried to cheer Chloe up, especially Alice, and they'd all be mad at Rimuru even more now. Chloe would walk away wiping the tears as she picks her book off, wiping the dust off it from the ground. Finally, it would be Gale's turn, who would fire bullets made out of earth aura. These bullets not even touching Rimuru. Gojo would easily dodge around them with them not even coming into contact with him, and Gale's time would run out quite quickly. He'd be pretty mad saying that's cheating, with Rimuru apologizing, but that's life. At this point, it's Ryota's turn, the quiet kid who had been taking the time until now. Gojo had completely misjudged him. Even with 6 eyes and Great Sage, he hadn't expected his body enhancement skill to be this. He was expecting him to use some enhancement skills, but he didn't know it would transform him like this. Ryota would have gone from the quiet and chill out dude to being a little crash out, with Ryota screaming and biting like a cocaine crack addict who's begging you for money. Well, anyway, that's a little too much detail. But Ryota would begin striking at Gojo mercilessly, using his claws and teeth and everything. Let's just say Gojo's image of Ryota has been completely ruined in his mind. Lastly, but not least, Alice herself would use her puppetry, a rather unique technique that Rimuru would actually find interesting. Gojo thinking it's a unique ability that might make her the strongest out of all of these kids someday, finding it to be incredible. He'd even compliment her on it, saying that if she continues working on this, it might pose a threat to him at some point. Of course, he didn't really believe that, but all the same, her potential was definitely there. He decided about using purple on the animals just to show off a little bit, but Great Sage would quickly add a comment saying there is a 100% chance that if you do this, that Alice will cry. Gojo would laugh, deciding that he wasn't trying to get that sort of reputation as a teacher, and would quickly just continue batting them away, saying this is kind of annoying though. Finally, he'd get fed up with it as he uses Infinity, covering his body in a larger distance, increasing the distance of Infinity, and just letting them pound on it from afar. Finally, at least they're on my viewpoint now. Finally, the test would be over, with Gojo successfully proving to be far stronger than them. They would at least respect him for that.
The students would lose, but again, to Gojo's dismay, their energy and magicules inside their souls hasn't decreased at all. And he can't even use Degenerate, the skill that he had gained after crossing to this world, to separate it from their souls. It doesn't have that same ability like that one cursed spirit. If only it was that precise, or if he had that cursed technique. The same one that patchwork face guy had, the ability to manipulate souls, he could probably have removed the magicules from them. Oh well. Anyway, afterwards Rimuru or Gojo would pull out Shizu's mask, explaining that he's an old friend of Shizue, and would also promise that he's going to save their lives. Not a single one of them will die under his care. After all, it was her final wish. As he says this, he'd remember his time that he spent with Riko Amanai and Geto. Suguru and him, they were spent all that time together, and in the end, it amounted to nothing. Because it was all meaningless. It all ended in tragedy. But he would still promise that he's going to save them. And with that, the real level of the game begins. With this, the students begin calling Gojo Gojo-sensei as he requests, which would cause Gojo to basically become elated, with him saying, yes, I love the sound of that. It's like music to my ears. The students would be a bit turned off by that. Is he Diddy or something? But anyway, Gojo would have some resources. Remembering how Shizu had survived in this world for so long, thinking about how Ifrit had been fused with her, wondering if the Demon Lord Leon Cromwell had known about this symptom of otherworlders. He would decide to start with that, with him visiting Trainee. Gojo could easily do it. With all of them holding hands and making contact with Gojo, he could use his teleportation technique, reverting them back to the Great Forest of Jura for the cost of only some cursed energy, far cheaper than the magicules it would take for him to use actual teleportation. A spell that exists in this world, unlike the cursed techniques that were able to be inherited through blood alone, that could be learned. This teleportation using far more energy though. So in that sense, this cursed techniques that he possessed weren't worthless after all. Considering while magicules were more powerful, they had higher drawbacks as well. While using cursed energy was relatively easy for Gojo, especially with his huge pool of power that he's accumulated thus far. Trainee would inspect the kids, realizing that they definitely could at least carry greater elementals to inhabit them, with these spirits hopefully being able to stabilize their magic from their soul. Pretty much confirming Gojo's suspicions of how Shizu had survived so long. We have a small time skip to a few days later, where we have Gojo outside eating a picnic with his students, enjoying the nice air, and sparring. You see, Gojo was curious about something. He wanted to see if any of them potentially had the ability to use cursed energy. Considering that Gobta was able to use shadows, and the Tenshao's technique no less, it's possible there are others here who have a gift for cursed energy. And who else besides otherworlders, like these kids who actually come from my world, and may have been exposed to it at some point. Gojo would sigh. They have so much magicule it's hard to tell if they have any cursed energy leaking out. Suddenly, Gojo would see something looking up as he'd see it before anyone else, telling the kids to stay back as he holds his arm out. As a huge blue sky dragon would fly, hurtling through the air, ripping its wings through the clouds as it heads towards the capital city of Ingracia. Rimuru would leave the kids with Shizu's mask, saying that if they need to hide, to put that on, which Chloe would catch, leading everyone else to start fighting over it, while Gojo flies up into the air to go and confront the dragon. Gojo would fly up with his hands in his pockets as he flies over at an infinitely faster speed than this dragon could move. Just as the dragon's claws were about to penetrate into a sheep from a merchant, Gojo would appear right in front of it, its claws ripping into infinity as an explosion of power and force would cause the dragon to be an immovable object, its leg, claw, and foot getting ripped off from the force of impact into infinity, with it going crashing into the countryside. Gojo would quickly walk up to it, his hands still in his pockets, as he stomps his foot down at its neck, holding his hand out as he says, "This is boring," using gluttony on it as he completely absorbs the creature and it disappears with an instant. He'd have Great Sage analyze it to see if there's any useful skills. Not with too much. What was I expecting? At least while some of these skills are completely unapplicable to me, things like sharp claws have no real use in my arsenal. Oh well, it's not like I have a limit anymore on what I can learn. He would turn back, walking towards the merchant, who would introduce himself as being named Mjolnir, a rather large man, who would be grinning ear to ear, happy to see that his precious flock had been saved from this dragon through this kind stranger's ability. It was through this save that Gojo would have gotten a free dinner for him and the kids, so Millmeyer would have invited them back to his mansion, where he would have dinner with the man who saved his life as well as the children he was teaching. Millmeyer's intelligence network as a merchant would have already identified who Rimuru was, with him being notorious for having taken out Charybdis, not to mention his relationship with the adventurers who had taken out the orc disaster. Gojo would freely invite Millmeyer to come check out Tempest if he wants to help sell anything, saying they could use a little variety just like they have here. Gojo thinking it'd be nice to have some wares and some travel gifts for people to buy when they come visit. After the meal, one of Millmeyer's maids would ask if it was alright if she could pray for the blessing of these children. She'd begin her prayer to the Elemental Queen. This would cause Gojo to become curious, asking about why she used that prayer specifically. It's not like he mentioned anything about the spirits that he was looking for. How conveniently that she actually came from a country near the dwelling of elementals, the spirit cavern that the original Queen of Elementals, who had been Trainee's master before she died, were living in. And she was more than happy to share its location with him, which would give Gojo, as well as Ranga and the kids, a clear path forward for how Gojo could successfully save everyone. Meanwhile, other forces had begun to brew. In the background we can see a table of demon lords, this of course being Clayman, Frey, Carrion, and the others. Millen would be talking about her bestie, Rimuru, but Clayman would only have one thought in his mind. And he spared their lives? If he saved Carrion's men, he must be soft. I bet he's easy prey. And if that's the case, I'll teach that damn slime its place.
Last time, Gojo helped a man named Millmeyer, saved him from a dragon specifically, and also got dinner for himself and the kids that Shizu had left to him. Now he had attained a location from Millmeyer's maid, someone who had hailed from the land of spirits, where it said that a door to the labyrinth of the Spirit Queen remained unopened. Gojo would take the kids alongside with Ranga, heading to the stone doors after having a good night's rest and a nice dinner. With Gojo's 6 eyes, he could easily peer past the stone door, realizing that whatever sort of world that this Queen of Spirits lived in, it was similar to a veil from his old one, in that it completely blocked all of his vision from the outside, meaning that he would have to enter inside of this domain in order to truly find what's waiting for him there. Gojo would take a deep breath, pushing the doors open as himself, Ranga, and the children would follow behind him. With that, they'd enter into the Spirit Sanctuary, the legendary labyrinth controlled by the Queen of Spirits, and possibly the one who can save Rimuru and the kids from this predicament. With that, Gojo would only have one option: continue moving forward. He'd walk through and easily see through a number of traps laid before them, eventually entering into a large corridor that eventually opened up into a spherical room, a coliseum of the spirit labyrinth. Inside would be a large golem. It would be decorated with magisteel. Gojo had never seen such sophisticated magic circuitry before. Even with one glance of his 6 eyes, he'd be impressed, wondering how much research must have gone into creating an automata of this nature. As he entered into the room with the kids, he would be challenged by it as a voice rings out in a high-pitched squeal, saying, "You must defeat this golem. If so, your lives are forfeit, and if not, I will grant you 1 wit," as if though on cue. Gojo would yawn, holding up a hand as he simply says, "Red." With that, a ball of red energy would form in his palm, blasting forward as it rips the magisteel and the machine off the ground and into the wall, crashing into dust, as the voice would start sputtering in circles, saying, "Hey, I haven't counted down yet." Gojo would leap forward as he starts throwing punches at the machine. The voice would only get more frantic, screaming, saying, "Stop! Stop it!" With Gojo now even beginning to feel bad as the kids would say, "Gojo-sensei, maybe you should..." The voice would begin crying as she says, I just finished rebuilding it." And at that moment, a burst of light would appear, with Gojo holding up the scrap metal he had created. In the center of the room, we'd have a ball of light fly towards Gojo and slam him in the forehead,
Apparently, his six eyes and infinity had not recognized this as an attack due to how weak it was. The orange-haired pixie would start slamming her tiny fists into Gojo's face, saying, You bully! How dare you break my precious magic golem! I spent so much time on it! This is when Chloe and now the other girls in the class would begin to comfort the small fairy, saying, It's okay, Gojo-sensei will fix it, right, Gojo-sensei? Gojo would scratch his chin looking at the piece of junk before saying, you crying? Sorry. No, I can't fix this. To be completely honest, it's completely garbage. But, he'd see her eyes well up into tears. I can give you something even better. How about that, huh? I won't be quite as advanced as Automata, but it should serve your purposes. She'd cry out saying, what could he possibly have that he could offer to be equivalent to her grand masterpiece? She had put several minor spirits into that thing. It ran off of spirit magic power. It was impressive and unbeatable, or she had thought. Gojo would hold up his hands innocently, saying, well, hold your horses now. Give me a chance, alright? I got an idea. Hey, Great Sage, if I consume this, can you make a slimmer, more efficient replica based off of this material? And give it a more humanoid appearance. I'm gonna try using that demon summoning spell we learned earlier. Great Sage would sigh before humbly replying it'll try its best. With that, Gojo would use his devouring skill, consuming the entire mechanic, and causing all the kids in class to be horrified, now seeing his slime form for effectively the first time. With this, Ramaris, the guardian of the labyrinth, would watch as he creates a new body from the material of the scrap metal. She'd irritably point out that there's no magic circles in it, no conduits for magic power, asking what the heck he's planning to do with that. Gojo would say, Tisk. My dear sweet pixie, give it a chance, as he holds his hand out, pointing towards the ground and casting his summoning spell, summoning a greater demon of the black lineage. With that, he would have it contract with Ramaris, asking if this is a fair recompense, with this new contract and a greater demon being far more autonomous and powerful than what she had before. With that, Gojo would ask, well, Shrimpy, are you satisfied? Now, since I beat your Colossus thing, I'm gonna need you to give me my little favor too. He'd grab her by the wings, holding her up, and she'd start screaming, saying, let go of her, you brute, as she'd try kicking and swinging at Gojo some more. Gojo would turn, pointing his thumb back to the kids, saying, I'm looking for the Queen of Spirits. Can you tell me and maybe point me in the right direction? This is kind of a maze after all. I need her help in fixing them, since, they're dying and all. With that, she'd get even more mad, screaming that, you idiot, I'm the Queen of Spirits right here. Huh? Oh, you're kidding. That's really funny. He'd wipe a tear away. Ugh, almost got me there. Okay, but seriously, where's the Queen of Spirits? I really need to talk to her. At this point, Ramaris is not playing around. She starts now steaming from her head, getting all red and stomping. With that, she turned to her new Beretta, saying, Beretta, explain to this dope that I am the Queen of Spirits, the Demon Lord Ramaris, Lord of the Labyrinth. I am the Queen of Spirits. Just imagine the face Aqua makes in Konosuba. That's Ramaris right now. Beretta would ask Gojo to please be polite to her master, explaining that this is actually Ramaris, the Demon Lord, and the Queen of Spirits. At this point, Gojo would say, a Demon Lord, huh? Oh, I met one of those before. Milim, she's the destroyer, right? Milim Nava? I think that was her name. Ramaris would make a peeping sound, saying, Milim, yeah, she's pretty strong. So how close are you exactly? You wouldn't happen to also be a new Demon Lord or something, right? She'd hide behind Beretta. Gojo would laugh, scratching behind his head. Well, in the non-traditional sense, I kinda am. I do live in a city full of monsters. But I don't think that's what you're looking for. I'm not a Demon Lord. I'm just Gojo Satoru. The strongest guy around. Ramaris would laugh, saying that he's not the strongest person she's ever seen, saying that would have to belong to Gi Crimson, the strongest Demon Lord she's ever known, and probably the strongest person in the world. Huh? Someone stronger than me, huh? Well, I guess it's possible. After all, I did get defeated by Sukuna in my last life. It's definitely possible someone more powerful than Sukuna could be here. I've already met Milim, and she completely surpassed my infinity. Crimson, okay. I'll keep an eye out for that name. Oh, that's not what I was asking for, though. Sorry, what's your name again? Queen of the Spirits, Lord Ramen? Ra-mi-ris. It's Ramiris. God, I hate idiots like you. Gojo would laugh, saying, I'm just messing with you. I knew it was Ramarin. You know. But anyway, point being, okay? Hey, stop kicking me. I want to fix these guys. Can you help indwell some greater spirits in their bodies? If you take a look, their magicule levels are heightened above a normal degree. It's slowly killing them. I've heard from personal experience that by indwelling a greater spirit in someone like them, it can help stabilize that magic level. Want to give me a hand? Ramirez would take a look at the kids, saying, I definitely see it. Well, I guess it doesn't hurt to try, but I can't make any greater spirits appear. Let's go to the dwelling of spirits and see if anyone chooses them. With that, she'd guide them all, and eventually ask if anyone would like to go first, leading to Ken being the first to volunteer. Ken would gulp, stepping forward as he'd take a step into the center, waiting for the spirits to choose him. After a mere few moments, a golden light would appear as a great spirit of light would choose him, saying that he's going to be an incredible hero someday, merging with him, and his magicule stabilizing according to Great Sage and his 6 eyes. Gojo would smile as he pumps his fist, saying, yes, it worked! As the others would come to the stage, this is when we'd run into an issue. Some of the kids wouldn't be able to summon greater spirits. With this, Great Sage would come up with an idea, alerting Gojo of the idea of converting smaller mini-spirits using Predator to now consume spirits and create a greater spirit amalgamized of smaller, lesser spirits, which didn't have consciousness. Through this, he'd create these artificial spirits, indwelling them into the children and then stabilizing their magicules. Ramirez would be impressed, wondering how this guy has so much potential and control over magicules. She'd be wondering if he really was some sort of awakened being. Finally, it would be time for Chloe's turn. As she stands up, this is when something strange would happen. As if though space was folding, a rip would appear, as a woman with long black hair and almost a wedding dress-like apparel would fly through Gojo as he blocks, trying to keep her away from him. He'd hold up his infinity, but she'd phase right through it, holding her hands at his face as she practically kisses him while phasing through his body. He'd turn watching as she'd then merge into Chloe. As Chloe's magicules would stabilize, Gojo would wonder what the heck that was. Even Great Sage wouldn't have an answer, stating only again that it had detected a temporal anomaly. But I guess all's well that ends well. All of the kids would be stabilized, cheering that Gojo-sensei really saved them. Ramirez would be pleased with her new beretta, and everyone would leave the Sanctuary of Spirits. Ramirez would wave, saying goodbye to all of them, and sticking her tongue out and eye pulled down towards Gojo. With that, Gojo would sheepishly grin, saying, well, see you next time. Ramirez would reply, see ya never, as she slams the door behind them. Gojo would laugh, saying, well, I don't think she likes me very much. The kids would disagree, saying they seemed that they got along well. Ramirez would laugh now with Beretta, saying that guy's pretty interesting. Gojo would be sure to take them back to Mjolnir first, thanking him and the maid for all the help, saying that their goal has been attained. Mjolnir would tell Gojo anything time he needed him or anything he needed just to let him know. He'd always be there for him, as his savior. Finally, the entire team would head back to the Kingdom of Ingracia, with Ranga happily carrying them a great distance before they finally reach within range of Gojo's teleportation. He'd clasp his hands together as they teleport directly into the school, now back in the classroom, as they'd thank him for everything. Gojo would finish teaching up the week, with several little side adventures taking place, such as, well, Gojo having to go back and commission a whole cart from Kaiji and the others, having this little outdoor exhibition with the kids, but most of those events would take place per usual, with a bit of hints of future characters to come, just like in the actual OVAs we got from the show. But nothing greatly changes here aside from Gojo being a different observer from Rimuru. Eventually, the fateful day would come, where it was time to say goodbye to all of them. Chloe would have tears in her eyes, thanking Gojo Sensei for everything and asking when they'll see him again. Gojo would grin, saying, "Anytime you guys want to come see me, of course," as he pulls out Shizu's mask, giving the mask to Chloe and throwing it to the group. He turned, now hopping on Ranga's back, saying, "Let's head home," leaving the kids in Ingracia as he leaves out of the city gates, unprepared for the horrors awaiting him back in Tempest. While Ranga and Gojo are walking through a grassy field, we hear rustling as we see a woman with short black hair, cut neatly, a sword at her waist. She'd have a white, flowing cloak, and on her chest would be a plate steel armor. Her eyes would be a mix of colors like that of the rainbow, predominantly blue. It was one of Shizu's students, much like the man himself, Yuki Kakurazaka, the Knight Captain of the Holy Kingdom of Luminous, that being Hinata Sakaguchi. Gojo's eyes would meet Hinata's, his eyes a clear blue like that of a summer sky. These 6 eyes. As the two meet, Hinata, with her unmoving face, would speak with a tone equally cold as she draws her blade. "I'm surprised. Shizu-sensei really was killed by a monster. Your death won't be painless, slime." As Gojo would step off of Ranga, he'd tell him to enter his shadow quickly, as the two would quickly meet with a burst of a sound wave, as Hinata's step would reach Gojo instantly, as his fist would be now coming close into contact with her blade. Back at Tempest, we can see what's going on, as Falmuth's army has now moved into attack. Mulan, a girl that had been met by the heroes party that Gojo had set up as the heroes who had slain the orc disaster, had infiltrated Tempest, and in her time there, she had quickly set up a barrier. Using the anti-magic barrier to weaken the monsters, Falmuth's soldiers would descend on the location, beginning to slay all of them. Shion, with her sword drawn, would say that she'll defend her lord's land until her last, as Benimaru, Soe, and the others would try their hardest, all of them fighting off the threat. But with this anti-magic barrier and the anti-spatial teleportation shield, they were getting slaughtered. Goblins, all of the people that had come to now seek Gojo's protection, they were being slayed. At this point, we'd see Gobta now running out of magicules. However, Gobta would stand back up, as cursed energy would flow around him as he's fighting off the Falmuth soldiers. He'd say to hell with it, as everyone around him was beginning to die, he'd have to do it, pulling out his trump card. As Shion's life would pass, her energy fading, Gobta had no reason to hold back, now wielding the power of the 10 shadows that Gojo had bestowed on him. It was finally time. Gobta would squeeze his fists, holding them out as blood was pouring out of him, the Falmuth soldiers now pressing down on Tempest. He would begin the ritual. "With this sacred treasure I summon the Divine General, Maharaga!" The Heavenly General would descend out of Gobta's shadow, summoned from the 10 Shadows technique. As Maharaga would appear, it would begin beating Gobta, slamming his head to the ground as blood would spurt out. As Gobta would be the victim of Maharaga, the beast would turn its Shikigami gaze as its wheel would begin to turn against the Falmuth soldiers. The slice of her sword would cut through the air quickly. Gojo would step out of the way, using infinity as he blocks the next slash. This is when Great Sage would make an announcement, proclaiming that this dead-end rainbow that Hinata Sakaguchi was using had the ability to affect and harm the soul. Gojo would smile, saying it's not the first time he's fought someone like this, as he takes a step back, catching the blade as he tries to snap in his hands. She pulled the sword back, trying to cut him, as the energy of curse energy and magicules from her spirit arts would clash. Gojo would laugh, saying that unless she can use a simple domain, there's no way that's gonna. Gojo's eyes would be shocked, seeing as his infinity was beginning to take damage, just as if though she was using a simple domain. Oh, it's the positive energy from her spirits. Of course, negative energy and negative energy makes positive energy. She's done it. She's using something akin to a reverse curse technique and applying it to my infinity. Well, Shizu's memories aren't wrong, Hinata Sakaguchi. He'd take a step back as she swings her blade, impressed with his sheer speed and adaptability. She was certain he was stronger than him based purely off of the magicules she was sensing, but for some reason he seemed to have almost as much combat experience as she did. She was getting annoyed. Dead End Rainbow. I've already struck you several times, and yet it seems your soul isn't taking as much damage as I anticipated. You must have some sort of technique you're using to block it. No matter. I have an unblockable attack. Something that will eviscerate you in one strike. Rango would alert Gojo, saying that something's going on back at Tempest. He's getting a ton of distress signals. Great Sage would comment that they aren't receiving any data, suggesting the silence must be due to a barrier. Gojo would grit his teeth as he asked if they can break through it. Great Sage would say, easily, if we were from the outside. However, we're trapped inside another barrier, likely created by Hinata Sakaguchi. Hinata, while Gojo was thinking, would be casting the spell she was most proud of, Disintegration. The magic of destruction that used all of her spirit energy and completely eviscerated her target. Gojo would turn his eyes annoyingly towards Hinata, saying that he's got bigger problems right now. Hinata would say, "Don't avoid me," as she tries to cast the spell, sealing him inside of the now barrier around him with disintegration. Gojo would grit his teeth as he holds his hand out, saying, "Sorry, but I don't have time for games." Red and blue combined. At the moment of their merging, I transvert all of my magical power into one singular spot, enhancing the power of it. Sorry, Sakaguchi, but I don't have time for you right now. True hollow purple. Gojo would snap his fingers as a brilliant amethyst light would fill the air. The entire barrier, all of the magicules in the area, would be converted into imaginary energy, hollow purple, before he then pulls the magicules out of it, deactivating the ability and nullifying all of the magicules in the area. He would effectively have interrupted her spell. Removing all of the energy from her disintegration, Hinata would be shocked, her eyes wide as she asks, "How did you?" Before she could get another word in, Gojo would clasp his hands together onto Ranga as the two of them would disappear, vanishing from the area, having shattered the barriers around them and escape Hinata. Hinata would fall to the ground looking down as she realizes he's completely escaped her. Was that teleportation? He's even stronger than I thought. I'm not surprised that he actually managed to kill Shizu-sensei. Damn it, I failed! Meanwhile, back at Tempest, Gojo would arrive to see a sight of horror. The bodies of his comrades, of everyone in his town, everyone he had met in this world, and Shion. They'd be gathered in the center, Gobta laying next to her. And at that moment, they could only cower. As an explosion would shake the ground, Gojo would ask Benimaru and the others who had survived, who had been hiding in the center of town, asking what had happened, where was all of this destruction coming from? Gojo would grit his teeth. Unlike Rimuru, this was not his first experience with death. He lived every day knowing the consequence of living as a Jujutsu Sorcerer, fighting cursed spirits who ruined the lives of humans. But now, the friends he had made here had been slaughtered, and it wasn't from cursed spirits. It was from humans who viewed them as the monsters. He'd have flashes of his memory, recalling the day that he fatefully had held Amanai. The cheers of onlookers now shouting at Tengen's star platinum vessel, having her life ended by Toji Fushiguro, the man who had almost claimed his life almost 20 years ago now. Gojo grit his teeth asking where were these bastards, saying he'll take care of them. His energy was now fluctuating as his power would be leaking out. He'd have a crazy look in his eye as Benimaru would cough, saying that Gobta's summon was still fighting the enemy, and they were quickly hastily retreating from their forces. Thankfully, Gobta's sacrifice had saved a majority of them, with only these brave souls having been the ones to be slayed. When Gojo had first teleported outside of Tempest, he had been alerted of the anti-magic barrier from when he had entered. His cursed energy remained unaffected by this barrier. However, he wasn't the only one. He would sense him as he turns, his eyes looking off into the distance where he'd hear screams from Thalmuf's army, and the twisting of a wheel. Damn it. Gobta, you did it. You summoned him. The divine general to this world, huh? He looked down at Gobta. His eyes now filled with fury as he says, "There's a difference, you know. I tried telling you that. There's a difference between sacrificing everything to win and just sacrificing everything. Gojo would use Infinity to fly up into the air before now chasing after the cursed energy signature of Mahoraga. Using his 6 eyes, he'd easily detect him, as the screams of the humans of Falmuth's army would fall on deaf ears. Gojo would begin charging up another true hollow purple, as he aims it towards Mahoraga. Mahoraga would turn as it begins slashing at Gojo. Gojo would dodge out of the way as its blows would now crush into Falmuth's army, as it slowly had been adapting to all of the magic and blades they had been using on it. It had grown more powerful. Everything they had thrown at it had been failing against it. As it kept getting stronger, it adapted to all of their attacks. Falmuth's army stood no chance. Gojo wouldn't care though. In fact, he wished that Mahoraga had made a bigger mess, as he holds up his fingers saying, "Good night, Mahoraga," using a true hollow purple and blasting it through the chest. Even this wouldn't finish it off, as he moves forward at blinding speeds, pushing both of them outside of the anti-magic barrier where he can use his new techniques. Mahoraga had already gained a resistance to magic, but predation. Gojo would turn to a slime as he begins to cover Mahoraga. He'd begin consuming it. A battle of adaptation would occur as the Falmouth forces would be now caught in a wave of slime and screams from this cursed spirit. As Gojo, with all of his rage and fury, would power on, consuming Mahoraga quicker than it can adapt to its predation. As Gojo, much like with the Orc disaster, would completely devour Mahoraga, devouring the Divine General and having it analyzed by Great Sage. Gojo would stand before Falmuth's army. As slowly behind him, a golden disc would form as it begins to spin. Gojo would have a grin on his face, realizing he truly has become a monster. If there truly is a god, then why has he cast his favor, his gaze away from us? That was all that the soldiers of Falmouth could experience, as their lives would flash before their eyes. They had awakened a beast, no, a monster they could not control. A ball of red and blue light would rip through the space, ripping soldiers into pieces. Friends, comrades who had known each other for years, watching as their arms, limbs, and internal organs would splinter, mixing on the ground as the mud and human remains would become one. Many of the soldiers would bow down for mercy, hoping for some semblance of humanity from this being. But his mercy had long run out. Hollow black. At the tips of this being's fingers, his long white tinged blue hair would flow around his shoulders, and behind his head, a golden disc spinning like the hands of a clock. At the tips of his fingers, a ball of black energy would form. As he points in one direction, the soldiers would begin to fall, the very souls of their bodies being erased from existence, their flesh falling to the ground, an army of marionettes whose strings had been cut. The golden disc once again spun. Notification. Unlimited imprisonment has been fully analyzed. Would you like to disrupt the seal? Not yet. I'll hold on to it for now. I have some rats to take care of first. Satoru Gojo would look down at the battlefield, if you could call it that, before him. All that remained were a few squadrons and the king's tent, which he had left untouched on purpose. So pathetic. If they hadn't used that anti-magic barrier, I'm certain that my friends would have annihilated these weaklings. Great Sage, is it working on you too? I can tell. Your voice is slowly becoming more human by the minute. Gojo would turn his eyes back to the golden disc around his head. This is the power of the Divine General. Infinite evolution. Of course, its only weakness is that it requires time and a challenge. Luckily, it seems Valdora's seal was providing that for you. Isn't that right, Great Sage? Let's make this quick. As Great Sage listened to Gojo's thoughts, it only took a moment for another notification to pop into his mind.
As of now, we have acquired 57.235% of the required number of human souls necessary to start the Harvest Festival. Question: would you like to use the unique skill, Merciless? You have harvested the souls of all humans existing in this area.
Seems Merciless lives up to its name.
Notice, Checking the number of human souls required to cause the seed to sprout. The condition for evolution. Notice, the conditions have been met. The Harvest Festival will now begin.
Oh, my eyes are getting so heavy. I feel so sleepy.
Notice, the Harvest Festival cannot be halted once the process has begun.
Hey, Ranga.
Master, what do you need of me?
I'm not gonna be awake much longer. Take me back to town and capture these idiots too. Make sure they're alive.
Understood. I sent some survivors. Shall I take care of them as well?
No, it's fine. I'll get someone else to do it. You've done enough. Remove anti-magic area. Activate summon magic. Demon summoning. Alright, you filthy demons. For my offer, you can have all of the corpses I've formed for you here. Feed off of them and serve me well. It's finally time. I get to meet him. The master I've been dreaming of. I mean, of course, master. We'll serve you well and flush out any remaining survivors. Gojo, ever since we first met, you've always had incredible strength, power, and character. You can't let this win. You're the strongest.
Notice, the
Is
one
that
known as
the words of the
Gojo
world?
will now begin his Harvest
Master
Festival.
Gojo.
Those
Gojo.
who he has bonds
Master
with will
Gojo.
receive the gift
Gojo.
shortly after.
Gojo-sama, please.
We're all
Good
here
luck.
for
Do
you.
your
Let
best.
the Harvest Festival begin. Evolution requested from slime to demon slime. Evolution. Successful. Next, reacquiring all resistances from previous form. Successful. Continuing, the one known as Juro-Gojo has received unique skill, infinite regeneration, universal detect, Lord's ambition, enhanced replication, universal thread, natural element nullification, ailment nullification, spiritual attack resistance, holy attack resistance. That concludes the abilities gained from evolution. Notice. Unique skill, Great Sage, request an evolution. Skill formerly known as Wise One, request accepted. Wise One will attempt to evolve. Wise One will attempt to evolve. Fail, 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 attempt, fail, 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 attempt, fail, 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 fail. Unique skill, Great Sage offers a sacrifice of unique skill degenerate to complete evolution. Result, acceptable. Sacrifice accepted. Reattempting evolution of unique skill, Wise One. Unique skill, evolution success. Unique skill, Great Sage has evolved into ultimate skill, Raphael, Lord of Wisdom. Ultimate skill, Raphael proposes to sacrifice unique skill, Merciless, to form new ultimate skill. Result, successful. Ultimate skill, Lord of Gluttony, Beelzebul, acquired. Continuing, ultimate skill, Raphael proposes to sacrifice unique skill, Six Eyes, unique skill, Infinity, unique skill, Divine General. Accepted. Acquired ultimate skill, Lord of Eternity, Ouroboros. Transitioning. The gift shall be bestowed upon those connected to Rimuru Gojo.
The golden light that had enveloped Gojo's body would slowly dissipate, having completed his evolution into a true demon lord. His crimson red gaze would overlook the scenery before him. His loyal friends and servants, having all fallen to a deep slumber. That is, except for one. He would turn his head, his gaze lingering upon him, the red-haired general of his army, Benimaru, fighting the effects of the evolutionary process of the gift of the Harvest Festival. Benimaru would look up, making sure and his promise to Rimuru, to Gojo, would be maintained, hoping that this was still the truth, that Gojo had retained himself. As Benimaru gazed into his master's face, he could not see the gleeful smirk, the confident, coy look that Gojo always had. Concern would well up inside him as he thinks, "No, it's not possible that he could actually have." Suddenly, his master would speak, in a tone that seemed unfamiliar, yet at the same time, exactly what he would have expected from Gojo. "Order, you may rest now. I will handle it from here." The voice emanating from this body was not that of the Rimuru Gojo that he was so familiar with, but at the same time it felt comforting. He knew that he was allowed to rest. Benimaru would slump on his knees, falling headfirst to the stone plates of the capital city of the Juro-Gojo Federation. Now then, back to the matter at hand. Gojo would once again focus, his crimson eyes focusing now on the corpses of the friends he had once held dear, the comrades who had thrown themselves in the way of harm to protect the citizens of his kingdom. His bare footsteps would echo, taking each stone step as if though a massive walk, 10 meters or more. He'd approach the bodies of his friends, Muran and the others from the Beast Kingdom, watching in awe. This is the power of a true demon lord. In only a matter of moments, he'd raise his hands to the sky. The anti-magic barrier that had once helped in aiding the enemies in harming his friends now fulfilled its role in the opposite regard. Having contained the souls of its victims, Rimuru was finally able to use gluttony to absorb all of the souls inside the area and return them to their rightful host. Raphael would raise their hands to the sky, but just as they were about to begin casting the divine art, suddenly a flash of magic would appear, as Noir, the demon of black, the demon who Rimuru himself had summoned at his own Harvest Festival, would arrive kneeling at his side, with the two he had taken with and the body of the one he had captured. The demon of the family of Black would begin to speak. "Master, I have completed the order you've given me. Is it not yet time to return to your side?" He gazed hopefully, his black and crimson pupils meeting that of Rimuru. But his master would make an odd response, turning back toward the bodies he was about to rise, and the demon would witness the issue immediately. "How do you plan to complete this spell?" Raphael would sigh. "I was planning to use my own life force to make up for the difference in magicules." The demon who would become known as Diablo would stiffen, his spine sharpening as he turned to his subordinates. He would practically order them, pointing out to his master, saying, "Lord Gojo, please take these two to supplement the magical power instead. They'd be more than willing to sacrifice their souls for your good cause." He'd smirk. The two demons wouldn't dare outweigh his decision. Not him, for he was a primordial black, of the most ancient of demons, and his one desire to find a master who truly interested him, with the power to make his dreams reality, had finally arrived. The white-haired demon lord would turn. The crimson eyes that had once shone such brilliant blue would gaze upon the two demons. Calculating. Result: successful. I suppose this is acceptable. Now, gluttony. Without a moment's notice or hesitation, Raphael would devour the demons, converting their souls and magicules into power, and begin the spell, the divine art of spirit sanctification, bringing the souls from within the anti-magic barrier back to their hosts. Our story now shifts to 10 hours later, as the victims of the Harvest Festival, or should I say receivers of the gift, would begin to rise. Benimaru and the rest would slowly wake up, having received power and gained strength from the rise of their lord and master, through the bond of Uriel and the bond of the name that they had been given by Rimuru, by Gojo himself. After the spirit sanctification, the demon of Noir would have caught his master as he reformed back into his slime form, having exhausted all of his strength in casting such a wide array of resurrection magic. And with that, he had been placed back on the stone pillar, where his evolution had taken place. Inside of Gojo, we would see the form of the storm dragon, Veldora. Veldora had obtained the investigative king Faust, the ability to manipulate probability itself, and it was finally time for Veldora to return. After Gojo had awakened and greeted the demon alongside the rest of his comrades, he would have officially taken his leave, saying he'll be returning soon, heading to Veldora's cavern where he had first met the storm dragon for what felt like so long ago. And at this moment, he would revive Veldora, creating a clone body of his own and restoring Veldora's soul into it, giving him physical form. It was at this moment that Veldora would awaken to something that he hadn't had the last time. In this moment, as Veldora enters into Gojo's new body he had created, Veldora would awaken to his own power. Much like Gojo had gained the ultimate skill Storm Dragon, Veldora had taken something from Gojo. When he stood before him, Gojo would be surprised. His six eyes still activated through the ultimate skill of Ouroboros. He could tell all of the stats of Veldora, and in this point, he could see the amount of cursed energy flooding through him was insane. Then Gojo would remember. It's just like what that guy did. The guy who took over Suguru. He'd remember that back in the train station, the person who had taken over his best friend's body had gained his cursed technique. Was this something similar? Because according to his evolved six eyes, the eternal eyes of Ouroboros, he could see that Veldora possessed the base skills he had before they'd become an ultimate skill. He had passed on the cursed techniques that had been etched into his own body. And so Veldora now actually possessed the skill of infinity. Although unsurprisingly to Gojo, Veldora did not possess the six eyes. Still, infinity was an incredibly powerful cursed technique. And with Veldora's raw strength and power, he was an absolute monster. This would lead Gojo to think about how it's possible that these same cursed techniques were appearing in this world. Remembering when Gobta had just been able to summon a demon dog one day, when he had been trying to summon Ranga or one of the other Star Wolves using the magic ability he had learned in the Dwarven Kingdom. And yet, simply being exposed to cursed energy was enough for it to spread? Gojo briefly thought about the origins of cursed energy and whether he had brought something to this world that could never be removed. But his thoughts would be interrupted as Veldora would scream, "Hell yeah! Hey, Rimuru, check out these guns!" He'd flex his biceps, his magical power bursting and storm dragoning everywhere. Gojo would stand as his hair would get whipped around in the wind. He'd noticed now just that Veldora was a little taller than him, wondering if that had anything to do with magical count, looking down at his own body, himself having grown a few inches after becoming a demon lord. Yeah, it's good to have you back, buddy, he'd say, reaching out to pat him on the shoulder. Veldora would once again laugh joyously. Yes, it is good to have me back. Now then. He'd prepare to walk out of the cavern as Gojo would stop him, holding his hands out in front, saying, "You cannot go out there like that. You'll scare half of our civilians to death if you do that. And I just revived them, so that's not happening." Veldora would be disappointed, asking what he wants from him, with Gojo reminding him of what that guy in the orange gi did. Remember from the novels you like, where he hides his power level? Do something like that. Gojo would try to explain it haphazardly, as Veldora would instantly pick up on the idea, beginning to charge in a distinctly Super Saiyan-like standard. It was only like this with him screaming out that Gojo would realize he's doing the opposite of the character, where they'd scream out and let their power level rise. He was absorbing his magicules back into his body. It was quite childish. Whatever, lets him be happy, I guess. Yeah, buddy, you're doing a great job. Anyway, let's get back to town. I gotta introduce you to everybody. And with that, we'd have Veldora being introduced to the rest of Tempest assembled before Gojo, introducing him as his sworn friend. Everyone would be shocked, screaming out if that's actually the Storm Dragon, with Veldora and his now blonde and tan skin patting Rimuru on the back. Gojo would grin as he says, "Yeah, he's a bit awkward, so be nice to him, guys." "Hey, what's that supposed to mean?" The two of them would bicker back and forth, with Gojo remembering how nice it was to have someone who he could deem an equal. Even Gojo could tell, especially now, that defeating Veldora would be a task of monumental proportions. He finally had someone who he could see right before his eyes, who was on the same level as even he was. Now then, to explain a little bit more about Ouroboros, since many of you might be wondering about this skill, being brand new and all, and developed not from the original story of Tensura, I'll enlighten you a bit before we get into the final war arc of this story. That is, what Ouroboros actually does. Ouroboros has upgraded the Six Eyes ability along with his cursed energy and cursed techniques to the point where, for Six Eyes for example, he's able to see all of the skills and abilities that a person possesses. Think of it as a superior analysis technique that allows him to combine Raphael with Six Eyes to the point where he can gaze at anyone and instantly understand all of their skills and abilities and how they're used. It's pretty broken. So to define it, what Ouroboros actually does is it combines the evolutionary capabilities of Divine General with his Six Eyes analytical skills to allow him to use predictive understanding to a point of reading the future, to where he can understand everything an opponent is capable of without them even revealing it. Unlike Great Sage, who has to take an attack to analyze it, such as when Rimuru in the actual timeline has to take a Melt Slash so that Great Sage / Raphael can actually take Holy Magic. This version of Gojo, simply by observing a person without using their skills, can manipulate the abilities he has to counter those skills or steal them. It is so broken because it even reveals the person's true name and their soul, so no one can even hide their identity from him. So when he sees a person, he can read everything about them through their cursed energy, through their soul. It's essentially soul reading. So that's what it does. It allows him to evolve all of his skills based on his opponent and customize his toolkit to be able to defeat anyone he comes across. It's busted. But enough of that, enough glazing. We're going to get back to the story now. With Rimuru and Veldora now officially introduced to the rest of Tempest, it's only a matter of time before the war gets started. With the remainder of Beast Carrion's forces now commanding under Gojo, it was time to lay siege to Clayman's armies, take his treasures, and destroy everything that he had taken from them. The time for payback had arrived. And just in time, too. After several meetings with the Council from Thalion, the Dwarven Kingdom, Dwargon, and more human countries, with Gojo proclaiming his rise to the status of a Demon Lord, he would have many emissaries coming to speak with him. The last and greatest of which, of course, being Ramaris, the one who he had encountered during his time as a teacher, looking for the great spirits to inhabit the students to protect them. Hey, Rimuru! What are you going on about, calling yourself a Demon Lord, huh? Are you trying to get yourself killed? Gojo would laugh. Ramaris? What's all this about? Veldora would turn a page of his novel. Ramaris would be in a panic, saying, You don't understand! The council is being formed from Walpurgis? Clayman is saying that they need to eradicate you for calling yourself a false demon lord. Come on, that can't really be true, right? Rimuru would close his eyes as Gojo would release his power, his magicals pouring out of him, as everyone standing around the table would watch in awe as we would see the haki, the will of the ambition of a demon lord. Ramaris would be shocked, with Gojo smirking, saying he really did become one. And at this point, he'll be going to meet Clayman and tell him on his terms that he has no right to call him a fraud. Behind him, we'd hear a muffled, giddy laugh, as Ramaris would turn, seeing the black-haired demon standing behind Gojo. And to the left of him would be Shion, the purple-haired Oni. Oh, who's this? She'd ask questioningly. The demon would look down, smiling upon her, as Gojo would wave his hand, saying, He's my new secretary, just don't worry about it. And with this, the alliances that Dwargon had promised, along with Thalion, the Kingdom of Lumend, and beyond, it was finally time to start their forces. With Gojo now realizing the issue of how he was going to get his troops to where they needed to be before Walpurgis. Shion would begin working on Gojo's outfit, which he would have had a few ideas for, giving her a rather unorthodox design idea. The perfect image of what he deemed to be a true demon king. As the day of Walpurgis arrived, it was merely time for Gojo to send his forces. And so, he would use the mass teleportation spell, a spell calculated by Raphael to be nearly impossible before evolution. With a mere snap of his fingers, it would be done. The entire army would be teleported directly into the battlefield, with Benimaru leading as their general. Rimuru would wish his forces good luck, telling them and ordering them, no matter what, that none of them can fall. And with that, it was only a matter of time before Shuna was finally finished with his outfit. Having had him wear it while tailoring it, she would remark with Diablo's agreement at how regal he looked. Turning our perspective back onto Gojo, he'd be wearing a white kimono-type outfit, with similar black markings that should be familiar to my Jujutsu Kaisen fans. Yes, in accordance with the tradition of Gojo wearing the outfits of those who he's defeated, just as Gojo had worn Toji's outfit to fight Sukuna, it was now time, since he had risen to the occasion and become a demon lord, to steal the style of his last opponent, that being the King of Curses. Yeah, that's right, Gojo is going into Walpurgis wearing Sukuna's fit. When Rain and Misery would arrive, the door leading to Walpurgis would appear behind them. The two demon maids, one with blue, the other with green hair, would stand at either side in attention, waiting for their invitee. In this case, they'd proclaim, "Lady Ramirez, we've come to collect you." Gojo would practically fall off his chair. But what? Ramirez, you're really, huh. You know, I kind of didn't expect that. I thought you were pulling my leg. Well, guess I'm coming along. Shion, Ranga, are you coming? The Dryads would follow behind Ramirez, as Gojo's own guards would stand at his side, not like he needed them. As the trio would walk through the door, Gojo would recognize this type of ability. In its nature, it reminded him of a domain. With the ability to rip a piece of space away from the rest of reality, that's exactly what it felt like he was walking into a trap. He'd shake off this feeling, entering into the bowels of the demon's courthouse, entering into Walpurgis. Gojo would take a moment, his white hair fluttering around his shoulders, as he turns to gaze upon those sitting at the table. Automatically, Ouroboros would begin analyzing all of the demon lords sitting in the room. And even without Ouroboros, it was clear by far. The most powerful among them by far clearly was Gi. Ramirez would fly up to him. The tiny fairy hovering close to his face, Gi's cold, stony face would turn to a smile. Ramirez, it's been a while. How have you been? Is that labyrinth of yours still growing? With the two engaging in pleasant conversation, Gojo would shake off the feeling that he had been getting interrogated, as he would turn looking at the others who had arrived. His eyes had first fallen upon Gi Crimson, the strongest one there naturally. Next, he turned to see Frey, the Queen of the Sky. Her power seemed far lower than his own. He believed she could be pretty easy to take in combat. Next, Doug Rule. His magic power was nuts. Magicules were practically pouring off of him. Next was Dino, but upon gazing over him, he'd be surprised of the information he had gained. Interesting. I don't have time to unpack that now, but I'll definitely have to go back later. An angel, huh? I wonder what that even means in this world. He'd also see Luminous Valentine entering, alongside Leon Cromwell. He'd grit his teeth, but the burst of hatred he had felt for Shizu was gone after a moment. Something about Leon was different than the others. He's an otherworlder? Leon would turn his eyes toward Gojo. He'd merely say that he felt his skin crawling as he goes to take his seat at the table. Gojo would grin, wondering if he could sense that he was analyzing him, before turning back again once more, seeing as the final members had arrived. The final members of the 10 great demon lords, Claymen, and Milim Nava. Gojo would feel a spark of joy before remembering what the survivors of the Beast Kingdom had told him, that it was Milim who had destroyed their kingdom. It was Milim who had destroyed Carrion. His thoughts would rush, even with thought acceleration, but he'd be snapped back to reality, as Clayman would laugh, telling her to move, dullard, as he would slam his fist down on Malim's head. Gojo would freak out thinking she was about to attack, when he'd see she'd do nothing. Malim? He'd watch in horror as she'd simply get back up and continue following him like a dog. With Gojo's 6 eyes, he couldn't understand. Why? There's no status effects of mind control or evident use of magic or curses. Gojo would grit his teeth, his eyes filled with hatred watching Clayman. He'd think to himself, I don't care how you got it over on Milim. I won't dare let you hurt her or anyone else, not after what you caused. Clayman, your death will not be painless. And with everyone having arrived, Valpurgis would officially begin. Meanwhile, outside in the world, the forces from the Juro-Gojo Federation would now be laying siege to the puppet nation of Jistav. The battle against Clayman's fingers would be growing intense, with Benimaru now coming into play as he'd aid the Beastketeers in fighting off the terror that had once almost destroyed Tempest before Milim herself had gotten involved, Charybdis. While Rimuru's forces battled on, he was in Walpurgis talking against Demon Lord Clayman, who'd be throwing accusations at him, claiming he had killed his precious Mulan, a Majin he had hand-trained and picked himself out of malice. He'd spitefully talk about how dangerous it was to have a monster like a slime in this room with them, saying how filthy it was. Gojo would sit there taking the abuse as the other Demon Lords would watch, before he'd stand saying that Clayman's full of crap, using his memory augmentation ability to show visual representations of physical data, summoning a TV. He'd essentially just show videos of everything Clayman had done, even proving that Mulan was alive, and revealing the heart that he had removed from her after the truth had come out that it was her doing in the scheme of Clayman that had gotten his people slaughtered. With a little more back and forth and Rimuru rage baiting Clayman, there was finally an impasse, and it was here where Gi would determine that trial by combat shall determine the winner. Casting his barrier spell, Gojo would allow himself to be taken in within it, as his own forces versus Clayman's would begin. Shion and Ranga would join him at his side. Inside the barrier would be Milim, Clayman, and the 6 fingers he had called upon. Gojo would use mental telepathy to speak to Shion and Ranga, instructing them to disarm and take down the fingers and have no mercy on Clayman. He'd turn his attention to Milim. Shion, you can play with Clayman, but his life is mine. I'm gonna have a little rematch with Milim while I'm waiting. I want to break the curse this bastard put on her. Without a moment's notice, Milim would kick off, throwing a punch at Rimuru at supersonic speeds. But he'd easily dodge out of the way, predicting the attack, not even getting his cheek scratched, his eyes flashing a brilliant blue against Milim's. As the 2 Demon Lords would begin to fight, Clayman would mock him, saying he's so lucky to have so many powerful allies on his side. He'd laugh, saying, "The Storm Dragon Veldora bowing to a slime? How ridiculous." But Clayman's confidence would slowly begin to evaporate, seeing as Milim, who was clearly trying, was barely making any contact with Rimuru. Gojo would dodge magic attacks while using Infinity to block physical ones. Milim was trying her best to break through the Infinity, but this time he knew. He knew that she could surpass it and was playing carefully. Raphael, why is Milim acting like she's under mind control? But Raphael would remain silent. He'd dodge a kick from her as she starts casting more magic, with Rimuru starting to get ticked off. Gojo will hold his hand up as he easily uses Infinity to block the magic, doubling the distance and strength, creating an imaginary barrier. Essentially applying the concept of Hollow Purple's imaginary matter to his Infinity, the barrier he created using purely blue/space. This barrier, empowered by Uriel's ultimate skill, was far superior to his regular Infinity, and also a nigh unbreakable construct. It's at this moment that Clayman would finally yell out saying, "Just use your Draco Buster, just kill that fool!" But as she was about to now transform, Veldora would appear, getting blasted and fully in the face by Milim, where he'd scream, "Ah, Rimuru, please! I know I surprised you, but you didn't have to hit me that hard." Gojo would roll out from behind Veldora. "Veldora? What are you doing here? I thought I said you were supposed to stay in town." He'd turn asking, begging him to give him the next volume, saying he can't just laze around being bored, and it hurts, he's so tired, he just wants to let his aura out, and you said I can't. The 2 of them would continue to bicker, while Milim would watch before it was her turn to fight. That is, when Veldora said he'd play with her. In the background, we'd be seeing Kamehameha waves going after Milim, and Gojo would head over to Ranga asking what's going on, as he sees that the fox spirit he was fighting was in crippling pain. Gojo would realize that he's been using puppeteering magic to control the beasts, Gojo would easily dispel it, using his own magicule ability and his manipulation of it to dispel and cure the small fox creature, gently catching it in his arms. Rango would growl at her. With Gojo giving him a disapproving look, Rango would make a sound. At this point, he'd hand the small fox creature to Rango, saying to take her back to the city, with Gojo turning his eye upon Clayman. Shion had been destroying him. It wasn't even a contest. The skill she had obtained with soul nullification had given her complete resistance against his puppeteering magic, and he was freaking out, realizing how outmatched he was by one of Rimuru's servants. He would be screaming, telling everyone this can't be how it ends. It's not right. Hey, Shion, can you finish him off already? Gojo would be irritated, completely underwhelmed. He had been expecting a challenge, a fight. This was, frankly, disappointing. He wished he had fought Malim a little more before Veldora had shown up. At that exact moment, this is when Clayman would order Malim to stop fricking around and take care of everyone. Malim would turn, saying, why would I do that? And with that, Clayman would truly feel defeated, realizing that none of them had ever been on his side. Frey, Malim, no one. At this moment, he began to feel the pain and suffering of everything he had endured this far, remembering the words of chiding from Laplace, remembering that the Harlequin Alliance had been there to back him up, and he had turned them down. He'd reach his hand out whispering for Kazalim-sama. His soul would be burnt away as the words of the world would speak, giving him enough power to, well, convert his soul to energy, allowing him to have one last attack, as he'd throw everything he has at Gojo with a single blast. Gi Crimson would lean forward, as Gojo would stand there unmoving. He wouldn't even bat an eye, tanking the attack straight to the face, as he would have been completely untouched. The barrier of infinity surrounding him having taken the blast, Clayman would try to run, turning as he tries to escape, but what? He couldn't move? He couldn't think? What is? Gi Crimson would be watching with most interest, as Gojo would raise a single hand, his fingers crossed. He'd have cast thought acceleration on Clayman, slowing down his thought process by millions of times. And in that exact moment, he had cast, as the blast hit him, a domain expansion, Infinite Void. His newly enhanced domain fried Clayman's brain. His soul would be ripped to shreds in the domain as millions of gigabytes and tresabytes of information would flood Clayman, his soul being overpowered and overwritten by the amount of information Gojo pushed into his mind. It was a torture beyond any he could endure. To explain how absolutely messed up this is, for those who've watched Season 2, Gojo cast a 0.5 second domain so that he could take out all of the cursed humans fighting on the train station, and he had used it just a little bit so that none of the humans would be totally wiped out outside of the next 6 months. In this case, he had used thought acceleration on Clayman and cast it in such a short amount of time that not even Gi could have seen what he had done, completely brain frying Clayman. He essentially made him brain dead. And with that, Clayman would fall to the ground. Regardless of having the ability to escape his body, his soul was so damaged from the attack that his race and class abilities as a Deathman were completely negated. Just lying there, Gojo would then absorb him, using gluttony and devouring Clayman whole, removing any trace of him, as his eyes would flash up to Gi Crimson, matching him. The battle would officially end, and before Gi can remove his barrier, Gojo would snap his fingers, the barrier shattering around him as he'd go back and take his seat. Guy would clench his fist, wondering who the hell this guy thinks he is, as he could already feel the burning passion to fight him. It was like staring at Noir. In this version of events, he had even denied Beretta from aiding Gojo, because unlike the original where he was struggling against Malim, he saw no need for anyone else to interfere, even being surprised when Veldora appeared, saying this is way too much. At this point, he'd recognized what a threat that this person induced, deciding that it'd be best to keep an eye on him, officially declaring him as a new Demon Lord. With Gojo officially being added to the council, the issue of the name would come up. With Octagram finally being decided upon, Walpurgis would come to an end as the new 10 Great Demon Lords' name would be Octogram. After the meeting had ended, Gojo would turn over to Malim, walking up and giving her a smack on the head, not asimilar to what Clayman did, but with way less malice and physical force. Hey, what kind of stunt do you think you were pulling? I saw you acting back there, and I didn't appreciate it. You were seriously trying to kill me, weren't you? Gi would watch with interest as Malim and Gojo would interact, noting about what a curiosity this new factor was, and wondering what it was that he had felt. This presence of an unfamiliar energy. A few months would have passed now, as we see the city of Gojo having grown tremendously. With the roads getting paved and everything now being built, it was only a matter of time before this country became a superpower. With Diablo working to undermine Falmouth and take over their country, with Yom, the champion, taking over, it was only a matter of time before everything fell into place. That is, except for one project. Gojo would walk into the strangely constructed building, familiar with its interior. It was designed in the style of the old classrooms from his home, from Jujutsu High. He'd walk into the classroom to see 3 children of different monster clans from the forest, each of them having been determined to possess cursed energy. In the last few months, strange monsters have been appearing that are invisible to humans, and even to monsters. As Gojo entered the classroom, he'd hear from another room a child saying "Gobta-sensei" as he'd smirk. He'd sit down at the desk, pulling the blindfold over his eye as he looks at the 3 young monster kids, asking if any of them had ever seen a cursed spirit before. And with that brings us to an end of this story for Volume 6 of That Time Satoru Gojo Got Reincarnated as a Slime. I think this is a nice place to end it, with Gojo having finally accomplished his goal, becoming a Demon Lord, joining the 10 Council and Octagram, and taking out Clayman once and for all. Everything's looking up for him. He's even started a new Jujutsu High, training monsters' children and even human kids from the neighboring countries he's allied with in how to use cursed energy, raising a new generation of sorcerers to protect the world from the cursed energy that had flowed in when his soul transferred into the world of Tensura. If you guys want to see more, make sure to let me know. Otherwise, I think this is a great place to end the story, and I had a really fun time making this. This is originally just a one-shot that I wanted to do a couple months back, almost a year ago now, I think, actually. And I'm so glad that a lot of people liked it. I had a ton of fun writing this, and it was really cool to focus on how Gojo's personality changes things. I wanted to show more differences in how he ran the country too, but I think that you guys got the idea. One of the big focuses now for him is to raise that generation of Jujutsu sorcerers he was so proud of originally, and passing on his strength. Of course, for my Tensura fans, you know this isn't where the story ends. So if you really want to see what happens with the Eastern Empire, Hinata Sakaguchi, and more, show me some support. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I'll see you then. Ciao.